Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, May 14th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 951 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we speak to Adam Johnson, author of the new book, How to Sell a Genocide, about how U.S. media promoted Israel's false claims and shut out Palestinian voices and the truth. Later on in the program, Jon will cover week 10 of the battle in South Lebanon with footage from across the front lines. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine and Lebanon. Israel's attacks on Gaza continue to target children, homes, and civil infrastructure 7 months into a supposed ceasefire and more than 2.5 years into the genocide. On Wednesday, Israel wounded 8 Palestinians, most of them children, in attacks in the northern town of Beit Lahia and in Gaza City. On Tuesday, a Palestinian was killed in an Israeli drone attack on the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. And in Khan Yunis on May 10th, Israel killed 2 people in another serial attack on a police vehicle. The strike killed Wissam Fayez Abdelhadi, head of investigations in the Khan Yunis Police Department, and his aide, Fadi Abdelmouati Haikal. An Israeli missile strike on May 9th on the beach refugee camp in western Gaza City wounded 6 Palestinians, including 2 children, and set homes ablaze. Reporter Saad Hezbollah filmed the scene. Also on May 9th, reporter Nahed Hajjaj captured family members grieving over the body of Iyad al-Maktouk, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike while riding his bicycle north of Gaza City. This past week, a group of volunteers cleared rubble by hand and planted trees in the courtyard of the destroyed Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City to commemorate the hundreds of bodies that were buried in a mass grave by invading Israeli forces and later recovered. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital, who was abducted by the Israelis during the first siege on the hospital in November 2023, and imprisoned and tortured for 7 months before he was released in July 2024, told reporters that, quote, "Today, in this very spot, we plant olive trees. Just months ago, this place was a mass grave where over 500 bodies were recovered. But today we plant olive trees to declare that we will remain here as long as the olive trees endure. These olive trees will bear witness to the rebuilding of Al-Shifa Hospital." Meanwhile, physicians and health experts are warning that because of Israel's ongoing blockade on necessary medical equipment, medications, sanitizers, sterilization supplies, and construction materials, along with the systematic assassination and abductions of doctors, nurses, and specialists, infectious diseases are rampant across Gaza. Infectious disease specialist Dr. Salman Khan, who recently worked in Gaza, wrote this week in Mondoweiss that patients are developing antibiotic resistance. He reports, quote, due in part to ongoing restrictions on the entry of life-saving medicines by the Israeli occupation, the antibiotic supply is severely limited in Gaza, often changing week to week based on availability of donations from the World Health Organization. Patients unnecessarily die from often treatable infections because of delays in receiving effective antibiotic therapy. The collapse of the healthcare system, overwhelming overcrowding in and around hospitals, and breakdown of hygiene and sanitation infrastructure all conspired to facilitate the spread of multi-drug-resistant bacteria and exacerbate Gaza's antimicrobial resistance burden. Even before the genocide, Gaza suffered from high levels of antibiotic resistance, which has since accelerated. Heavy metal contamination from explosive remnants from Israeli airstrikes is also contributing to the selection of resistant bacteria in the environment, he said. Dr. Khan added that addressing the growing threat of infectious diseases requires bold, urgent action. Quote, firstly, a true ceasefire must be enacted. This includes lifting restrictions on entry of life-saving medical supplies and medicines, particularly antibiotics. Humanitarian workers must be allowed unimpeded access into Gaza, and currently imprisoned healthcare workers must be freed. Patients requiring specialty care must be allowed medical evacuation. Many of these patients succumb to infectious complications while awaiting safe passage. Resources must be allocated to rebuilding Gaza's sanitation infrastructure, healthcare system, and laboratory capacity. Only with these prerequisites in place can hospital infection prevention and control and antimicrobial stewardship programs realize their full potential. Finally, the systems of apartheid and occupation that created the conditions for medicide must be dismantled. Israel must be held accountable for its genocidal actions in Gaza, he said. One of the doctors who remains inside Israeli torture prisons is Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, the pediatrician and the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, which was besieged, raided, and destroyed by Israeli forces. Dr. Abu Safia was abducted in December 2024, and according to recent eyewitness testimonies from former prisoners who were detained with him, his health is deteriorating and he continues to endure brutal torture and denial of medical treatment. Euromed Human Rights Monitor gathered witness statements this past week, including testimony that his treatment by the Israeli prison guards is, quote, much crueler than that of other detainees. Witnesses say that Dr. Abu Safia is kept shackled for several days in a row with his hands tied behind his back, that Israeli guards raid his cell at night and throw stun grenades and tear gas near him, that he is being subjected to routine interrogations where he is beaten, verbally abused, and humiliated, that they strip him naked and set dogs on him, that he suffers from constant vomiting and is denied medical attention, and that he has lost a significant amount of weight. As we reported in late April, an Israeli military court extended Dr. Abu Safia's administrative detention, imprisonment without charge or trial, with Israeli authorities indicating that his detention is now indefinite. This week, the two international activists who are part of the global Samud flotilla that intended to break the Israeli siege on Gaza and deliver humanitarian aid, and who were intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters, abducted and imprisoned for more than a week, were released. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, a Palestinian citizen of Spain, and Tiago Avila, a Brazilian citizen, had engaged in hunger strikes during their detention until their release last weekend. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 spoke from Athens on his way back to Spain.
I just arrived to Athens. I left behind me thousands of Palestinian prisoners, children, women, and men. I'm sure that the treatment I face is not compared to the suffering they are going through. The testimonies we hear of their torture, of their violation on daily basis. We have to continue mobilizing. We cannot forget the Palestinian prisoners. I want to thank everyone who mobilized, our legal team, Adala, my family, my wife and children, my colleagues in the movement, the brave 180%. I heard your voices. It gave me strength. But we are not done yet. We have to continue. We have to continue to mobilize until Palestine is free. This is one step of the way. Our colleagues are still sailing. The people at sea are doing their part. Rise up at land in every corner of the world. We mobilize at land and at sea for a free Palestine.
Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers shot and killed a 16-year-old child near the town of Jaljulia, north of Ramallah, on Wednesday. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 was shot in the chest, according to the Palestine Red Crescent Society. 4 other Palestinians were injured by rubber-coated steel bullets, and during attacks carried out by Israeli settlers who were protected by the Israeli army on the villages of Sinjil, Jaljulia, and Abwain. Residents confronted the settlers who stole hundreds of sheep and agricultural equipment during the attack, witnesses said. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, on average, 1 Palestinian child has been killed every week in the occupied West Bank since January 2025. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder stated this week that, quote, that is 70 Palestinian children killed in this time frame. 93% of these were killed by Israeli forces. A further 850 children were injured, he added, noting that March 2026 saw the highest number of Palestinians injured by Israeli settler attacks in the past 20 years. Most of the children killed or wounded were hit by live ammunition, while others were stabbed, beaten, and pepper sprayed, UNICEF said. Israeli settlers carried out more than 20 separate pogroms on Palestinian villages across the West Bank last weekend, including an assault on a pregnant woman and an elder in an attack on the village of Jurish near Nablus. Local reports said settlers threw stones at homes in the village, entered several houses, and assaulted residents. In a pogrom on the village of Duyuk near Jericho, settlers entered Palestinians' homes early in the morning on Saturday and beat people with clubs while they were in their beds. Israeli forces killed a Palestinian man, Zakaria Ali Mohammed Qadis, on Tuesday in the village of Aram, north of Jerusalem. The day before, in nearby Kalandia refugee camp, Israeli forces killed 30-year-old Ayman Rafiq Mohammed al-Hashlamoon during an invasion in which soldiers reportedly stormed a vocational training center in the camp and fired tear gas, stun grenades, and live ammunition. Local reports say that al-Hashlamoon was shot in the head and later pronounced dead after Palestinian ambulance crews were reportedly prevented from reaching him. The Palestine Red Crescent said a 15-year-old boy was also wounded by a rubber-coated bullet Israeli soldiers fired inside the camp. In the village of Asasa, near Jenin, family members and loved ones grieved the death of 80-year-old Hussein Asasa last weekend. They buried him in the village cemetery. Immediately after, Israeli settlers from the nearby colony of Sanur started digging around the grave and threatened to dig up the body with a bulldozer if the family did not take it somewhere else. Mohammed Asasa, Hussein Asasa's son, told Reuters that, quote, we found that they already dug the grave and reached the body. We continued digging and got the body and buried him in another cemetery. The United Nations Human Rights Office stated that, quote, Israeli settlers today forced the family of Hussein Asasa, buried hours earlier in the Asasa cemetery south of Jenin, to dig up their father as Israeli security forces stood by. According to the family, they moved his body to another cemetery under a hail of stones from settlers. This is appalling and emblematic of the dehumanization of Palestinians that we see unfolding across the occupied Palestinian territories. It spares no one, dead or alive, said 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐤, head of the UN Human Rights Office. The cemetery sits 300 meters from Sanur settlement, which was reestablished by the Israeli government in 2025. Palestinians must now obtain Israeli permits to bury their dead there, as Hussein's family had done that same morning, the UN added. Last week, as we reported, Israel had notified dozens of Palestinians that their shops and businesses would be demolished in the town of Al-Azariya near Jerusalem as part of a plan to expand a nearby massive settlement colony. This week, Israeli bulldozers destroyed at least 50 shops and businesses in the town, ostensibly to make way for a new road to divert Palestinian traffic away from the Jewish-only settlement colony, according to the group Peace Now. Al Jazeera said that lawyers appealed to Israel's high court, but the demolitions went ahead anyway. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, at least 12 people, including children, were killed in a series of Israeli airstrikes on vehicles across several villages in the south on Wednesday. Our contributor 𝐄𝐤𝐿 𝐄𝐄 reported earlier today, on Thursday, that Israel targeted the Rasala Medical Center in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 in the district of Nabatea in the south. Another deliberate attack on Lebanese first responders, she said. This center serves as a hub for paramedics, firefighters, and ambulance services. Israel has damaged or completely destroyed more than 10,000 homes in Lebanon since the so-called ceasefire last month, according to the country's National Council for Scientific Research. And according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, nearly 3,000 people, including 200 children, have been killed in Israeli attacks since March 2nd. We'll have more on the situation in Lebanon later on in the program with Jon Elmer. We've published many features in the last week, but we wanted to highlight Gaza's Painful Journeys by Qasem Walid Al-Farah, writing from Gaza. Al-Farah explains the ad hoc transportation system right now in Gaza and the various obstacles Palestinians face trying to get from point A to point B, either by donkey cart, a trailer hitched to the back of a car, or walking, everyone forced to travel on streets strewn with rubble and with little money to pay for a shared taxi if those cars even have fuel, which is in short supply due to Israel's blockade. Every new day in Gaza starts the night before as people look for and prepare small change for the next day, he writes. On March 29th, 2026, my mother got a message from a mutual aid organization to come the next day to their distribution site in the Al-Mawasi area of Khan Yunis to receive a food package. But since she has a knee problem, I told her I would go instead. The package included a 25-kilogram sack of flour and 2 food parcels comprising canned beans, tomato paste, cooking oil, pasta, rice, and sugar. In total, the package weighed about 60 kilograms. Although it took me nearly an hour and a half to get the parcel that day, this would be considered quick when compared to the usual hours of waiting that people must endure to receive their aid. Still, getting the package was not the hardest part. It was whether I would be able to get a ride back to the tent. I went outside the aid distribution site to find a ride. Several men with donkey-pulled carts and kids with hand trolleys milled about, offering rides to those who had received their aid packages. A man with a donkey cart asked for 10 shekels in cash, 5 for me and another for the package. I declined. I haggled with other cart drivers for nearly 20 minutes under the blazing sun before a kid, Khalil, tempted me with a special offer. 10 shekels for the ride, but he would let me pay 5 via PayPal when we arrived at my tent. I agreed and asked about his cart. The kid went away for a moment and then returned with a hand-pulled cart. I was startled, mulling over how he would pull my 60-kilogram package all the way back. I asked about his age and if he could actually do this. He said he was 13, but I couldn't grasp that. He was too scraggly for such an age. His face was skinny with high sunken cheekbones, and his clothes were ragged, powdered with flour. After we secured the package in the trailer and Khalil began to pull it, I noticed that the sole of his left shoe was cut open. He pressed his foot against the ground in order to control the cart and be able to walk. Khalil told me that he is the eldest son. His father is an amputee, and Khalil has taken on the burden to work hard and provide for his family. I've been displaced for nearly a year now, and I crave to know the taste of having a break, and I'm sure Khalil shares that same desire with me, probably even more desperately so. The genocide has turned all of us into walkers. We have been on the constant move since our forcible displacements from our homes. In December 2023, my family and I were forcibly displaced from our house east of Khan Yunis to Rafah's Tel al-Sultan area, walking under a shower of bombshells. We didn't go to Rafah directly. We tried to shelter in downtown Khan Yunis, but then that area was issued another mass displacement order. We roamed the streets looking for a place to shelter until we reached Rafah. We walked nearly 16 kilometers on foot that day, according to my phone's tracker. But that wasn't our only displacement. We were forcibly displaced on July 2nd, July 16th, July 22nd, August 7th, August 22nd, and October 7th, 2024. Each time the Israeli army withdrew, we returned to our damaged house immediately, trekking multiple times from East Khan Yunis to the Al-Mawasi area west of Khan Yunis. On May 19th, 2025, Israel forcibly displaced all of eastern Khan Yunis, and this marked the last time we were able to walk to our damaged house. We haven't been able to go back to our neighborhood since then. As displaced people in tents, we have walked for long distances in winter under the rain and in summer amid the sweltering heat. Walking is the main expression of our misery in Gaza. We walk to survive, to swiftly escape the Israeli bombardment and invasions, to provide for our families. We walk for life, and we walk because we have no other option but to walk. It is another form of suffering we have normalized. Those are excerpts from Gaza's Painful Journeys by Qasem Walid Al-Farah, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. And now, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and reclamation across Palestine and around the world. The Samir Project, a mutual aid organization in Gaza, captured footage of a volleyball championship game in the Jabalia refugee camp in the north. I'll read the English translation and then we'll show the whole video clip. One of the players, sitting on top of another's shoulders, shouts, quote, "All respect to the camp, and we will remain steadfast. Despite the occupation, we remain steadfast in Jabalia camp. We will not leave this camp except as martyrs." And a narrator on camera says that, quote, "This championship came to strengthen our resilience here as citizens and sons of the great Jabalia camp, which has given martyrs, the wounded, and detainees for more than 2 years during this genocide. They came and challenged the world near the Yellow Line and the Zionist tanks and gunboats. Despite all this danger, they came to the camp to attend this exciting match with its outstanding players. This tournament embodies the spirit of sportsmanship and a sense of belonging, and serves as a tribute to the martyrs of Jabalia camp."
المخيم صامدين رغم أنف الاحتلال صامدين في مخيم جباليا لن نخرج من مخيم جباليا إلا شهداء.
جاءت هذه البطولة لتعزيز صمودنا هنا كمواطنون كأبناء مخيم جباليا العظيم الذي قدم الشهداء والجرحى والأسرى على مدار أكثر من عامين من هذه الحرب. أتوا وتحدوا كل العالم وبالقرب من الخط الأصفر ودبابات الاحتلال وزوارقه وكل أشكال الخطر، إلا أنهم أبوا إلى المجيء إلى هذا المخيم ليحضروا هذه المباراة الشيقة المتألقين لاعبيها بمعنى يسجد روح الانتماء الرياضية وتكريما لشهداء مخيم جباليا الذين ارتقوا في ظل هذا العدوان المتواصل.
And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague, Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. How are you?
I'm okay, hanging in there. How are you?
I think we all are.
Yeah.
I think we're all trying to. It often, more and more I'm starting to feel that as time passes, I feel more weight from this genocide, not less. It's ongoing, of course, but also we haven't really ever had time to absorb it all. None of us, of course, especially people in Gaza who are still trying to survive, but I just feel it, and I think we should all acknowledge that. I looked at a video I was writing an article I'll talk about later, I'll mention later, and I was going back to some of our earlier live streams. I thought, gosh, I look 10 years younger. And it was like 2 years ago.
I feel a lot older for sure. But it is. It's the weight. It's the psychological weight. It's the spiritual weight, the emotional weight of of bearing witness and of, being constantly scared for our friends and colleagues, and everyone in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Iran. I mean, the list is long, and it's really important, I think, for us all to take care of ourselves. It's not it's not a trope. It really, actually, we need to be ready, for this long haul. It is not an easy or quick struggle. This is a long road, but we're all on it together. So take care of each other.
And that's what we try and do. And so many people who are watching and listening feel that they're part of a community, and we feel their presence and their support. And I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that keeps us afloat as well. So we have a lot to get through today. We have Jon later on in the program talking more about Lebanon, and you're going to speak more about something that you're working on. And but first, we have this incredible and very long, but worth it.
It won't feel like it. It won't feel long.
It goes by quick.
It didn't feel long to me. It was just so rich and such an incredible discussion.
Yeah. So that's an interview that we did the day before with Adam Johnson about his new book, and looking at how the media has sold this genocide, mostly to the American public, but around the world, of course, as well. So let's go to that interview, and then we'll be back with more.
You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Ni'mah, here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. Here at the Electronic Intifada, one of our major tasks since the 7th of October 2023 has been exposing and debunking mainstream media lies that have been used to justify or deflect from Israel's genocide in Gaza. This includes exposing the mass rapes hoax and other atrocity stories, and documenting Israel's use of the Hannibal Directive, the mass killing of Israeli soldiers and civilians, not by Hamas, but by Israeli forces themselves on that day. Indeed, when the Electronic Intifada was founded, believe it or not, 25 years ago, we mainly engaged in media criticism. That's how we got our start. But as the internet developed into a widely accessible medium, we realized that we were not confined to being critics of establishment media. We could actually start doing journalism and writing analysis ourselves the way we thought it needed to be done. That's what we did, and that's what we're still doing today. But media criticism remains essential and very close to our hearts. So it was really exciting for me to read Adam Johnson's new book, How to Sell a Genocide. I want to read you a few sentences from the book's introduction. Adam writes, "Like any good media critic, my job is one of prosecutor. What this book seeks to do is not to make this case with polemic or ideological assertions or selective examples of bad coverage, but with robust data, by pulling from over 12,000 articles and 5,000 TV clips in 9 major outlets, and showing all the work in open source format, by interviewing sources who are in the room and using comparative analysis of other contemporary conflicts, I will attempt to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the genocide in Gaza was enabled, facilitated, and cheer-led by establishment US media, providing cover for months of a nihilistic campaign of starvation, bombing, arbitrary detention, shooting, and sexual violence." I was struck by Adam's description of himself as a prosecutor. I think that is exactly what media critics should be, but I also think it is what a journalist should be, not someone who just regurgitates the lines of both sides, or more often, the line of those with the most power, and then throws up their hands and tells the audience, "You decide where the truth lies." Our job as journalists is to follow the evidence and find the truth, and to say it plainly, without fear or favor. Adam Johnson's book, How to Sell a Genocide, is certainly an exercise in truth-telling, and Adam is a well-known teller of hard truths. He is the co-host with Nima Shirazi of the excellent Citations Needed podcast, and his writing has been featured by The Nation, in these Times, The Intercept, the Los Angeles Times, and the San Francisco Chronicle. He has also written a number of invaluable analyses for fairness and accuracy in reporting. We're so pleased now to welcome Adam Johnson to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Hi, Adam. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Adam, first of all, congratulations on the publication of How to Sell a Genocide. It's really an incredibly well-researched book, and it's available now from Pluto Press. And I should note that you are donating all royalties from sales of the book to the Middle East Children's Alliance.
Yeah, the sales of the books. That's royalties, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great gesture. Thank you for doing that, Adam. So, Adam, you have a new article in The Intercept headlined 7 examples of Gaza media coverage that prove pro-Israel bias. And in it, you document some of the major patterns in the media coverage of the genocide, which are, of course, also explored in the book. The first one, which we're all familiar with, is Israel's so-called right to self-defense. Let's look at this little compilation that is also in the Intercept article.
Right to defend itself.
Right to defend themselves.
Right to defend itself.
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 The right to defend itself.
Right to defend itself.
Right to defend itself.
Right to defend itself.
So we've all heard that mantra many times, and it's even more striking when it's all put together like that. But what you document, which we can see in this graphic, is that the media exclusively awarded the right to self-defense to Israel and never to Palestinians. Tell us just talk us through what we're seeing on the screen here and what you found in your research.
Yeah. So what we found in our research was that there's this inherent, the way in which you hand wave away the massive carnage that comes out of Gaza at this point in the first week or 2, 3 weeks, few months, is you evoke this concept of, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, with the implication being is that the deaths are a regrettable but inevitable result of a so-called war on Hamas, a war on Hamas that everybody who knew anything about Gaza prior to October 7th knew was pretextual and in key ways kind of a fatuous concept altogether. Now they needed to evoke this so-called right because it implied that any effort pursuant such a right was therefore justified. And of course, there's no corollary or parallel right for Palestinians to defend themselves. They are permitted to die, or or they're painted as kind of a cartoon terrorists. And those are really the two options. And the third option is maybe native informant, right? You can write for the Atlantic. But those are pretty much your 3 options for Palestinians. And the term is almost exclusively used to hand wave away mass deaths. In fact, I don't think in our research we really found an example of such a right being evoked in a context that was not justifying the fundamental premises or axioms of the genocide as something inherently self-defensive or defensive in nature. And especially when you combine that with the fact that, of course, the clock always began on October 7th, and any mention of anything preceding that was heavily disciplined and policed, which we can get into later. So the idea is that while there may be this mounting death toll and these horrific images you're getting on your social media, they're inherently defensive. And this is reaffirmed through this kind of mindless, seemingly benign or seemingly, sort of obvious mantra that they have a right to defend themselves. Therefore, anything that happens from that is said to be assumed to be pursuant such a right.
Tamara, if you can just put that same graphic back up again. And what I want to point out here, because people might have missed it, maybe we can zoom in on it, that the blue line is the number of times these various media outlets mention Israel's so-called right to defend itself. And the green line is the number of times they mention the Palestinian right to self-defense. And as we can see, there basically is no green lines on this graph. So, there you can see for CNN and MSNBC. So I just wanted people to really understand what we're looking at.
And this is during the first 3 months of the genocide.
First 3 months, first 90 days of the genocide. That's correct.
Yeah. So I want to show another example out of the 7 patterns you outline in the Intercept article, as well as in How to Sell a Genocide. And that's the use of emotive language like barbarian and savage to describe acts of violence by Israelis versus Palestinians. And again, let's look at this brief video from the Intercept article that just illustrates what we're talking about.
Barbarity.
Barbarity.
Barbarism.
Barbaric.
Barbaric.
Barbarians.
Barbarism.
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 Barbaric.
Barbaric.
Barbaric. Barbarity.
Barbaric. Barbaric.
Barbarically.
The barbaric. Barbarity. Barbaric.
And then we can put up this graphic, which, again, the blue line is the number of times these various outlets are using the terms like massacre, slaughter, savage, barbaric in reference to Palestinian violence against Israelis. And the green lines, which are basically almost non-existent, is the number of times they describe Israeli violence against Palestinians in such terms. So it's pretty much across the board, one-sided. So those are a couple of examples of how meticulous your research is in this book. Give us a sort of a quick overview of some of the other key patterns you documented and that you also talk about in the article, and we will get into some of them in more detail.
Well, yeah, the reason why the graphics about emotive words is usually the starting point of our analysis is that it shows that there is a very clear double standard, and you can't really have a conversation with someone until they accept the premise that there's a very meaningful double standard. Because I don't think any rational person could say that Israel killed, at a minimum, again, the number's almost certainly twice this, 20,000 children over 2 years prior to the so-called recent ceasefire. Again, the number's almost certainly much higher. And they managed to kill 20,000 children, 20,000 worlds, 20,000 human beings. And never once did they commit a massacre or slaughter, according to the New York Times. That is obviously, I think, the most rational that any reasonable person would hear that and say that's not mathematically possible. That they would only kill 20,000 children, upwards of plus 100,000 people, and only do so because of some bumbling accident of some otherwise justified military campaign, which was the alibi that we were given repeatedly over and over again. And so seeing that asymmetry versus, again, 1 day of an attack versus 2 years of genocide, I think it's very clear that these terms are incredibly loaded and they're proxies for empathy. They're proxies for humanity, because Palestinians dying is seen as anodyne and almost kind of medical-like, whereas Israelis dying has to be put in these hyper-emotive and manipulative terms to get you to care about them, and specifically the words savage and barbaric, which are never ever used said to be used by the Israeli military. These are obviously very racially coded terms that date back to Victorian levels of racism and Orientalism. So they somehow get past the liberal censors for political correctness, despite the fact that they are only used against Muslim or Arab coded violence. Whereas Israelis, again, nothing they do, no matter how much they use, the actual definition of human shields, not the made up one that Jake Tapper uses, but the actual definition, no matter how many times they use sexual violence as a weapon of war, no matter how many times they target children with sniper fire. Again, we can go on and on and on. That nothing they do by definition could be said to be barbaric and savage. And when people at the New York Times and we emailed them and asked them to justify that, to say why is there this asymmetry? They don't have an answer. They just have a sort of ad hoc chauvinist or racist tautology where it just is different. And Breach Media in Canada reached out to the CBC and got a similar answer, where they say they found similar data in their numbers and said, why is it you only use emotive terms for the killing of Israelis and never Palestinians? And the answer they can only give is that it's buried under the assumption that Palestinians kill, or Palestinian militants kill simply for sadistic glee. They kill for the lulls and for the kind of pleasure of it as a kind of, again, ISIS-like entity versus Israelis who only kill with a capital V, capital H, very heavy heart. And they're always very sad about it, and it's reluctant. And despite the fact that we're talking about a 100-to-1 death count, it doesn't register as part of that moral framework. And so what you see repeatedly is that these emotive terms are used to exceptionalize and to scandalize certain violence and render other violence to be a sort of unfortunate byproduct of a otherwise sober and humanitarian military campaign.
Right. And what's interesting too, and you talk about this in the book, and in terms of how you structured this this book, How to Sell a Genocide, is that you focused on center left or establishment liberal media platforms, these corporate giants like New York Times, The Atlantic, MSNBC, CNN, and I think that's really interesting, and I want you to explain why you focused on these media platforms instead of like Fox or the Alex Jones show, or like any of these, but kind of related to that, you make the case that Israel's genocide in Gaza was enabled not only by Republicans or the openly pro-Israel anti-Palestinian right wing, but by a democratic administration and a liberal media ecosystem that worked overtime to protect it and caress, massage the narrative in
Right.
whatever way they wanted. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris kept arming and defending Israel, of course. AOC was reiterating over and over again that the Democratic Party was, quote, working tirelessly for a ceasefire. We still remember that. And this was happening while major center-left outlets laundered that policy through stories about Biden's, his supposed concern, his frustration with Israel, his antipathy and anger even toward Netanyahu himself, and with Israel and the alleged limits on U.S. leverage. How central is the Democratic Party's complicity to your argument that you lay out in How to Sell a Genocide? And what does the media's role in shielding Biden and Harris and Bernie Sanders tell us about the real function of liberal journalism when the U.S. power system itself is underwriting this mass barbaric slaughter?
Yeah, so that's the question a lot of people have, which is why focus on so-called liberal media. And it's an imperfect term, as I note in the introduction, as is corporate media, as is legacy media. They all have their problems. But we kind of broadly know what we mean when we say that, which is media that is largely consumed by Democrats and it largely endorses Democrats. And obviously there's gray areas here and there, but that's basically what we mean when we say legacy or mainstream media, or lowercase l liberal media, center left media. And the reason why I focused on that is because it's twofold. Number one, there was a Democratic president in the White House at the time. The book covers October of 2023 to October of 2024. So there was a Democrat in office that entire time. So what media was consumed by Democrats mattered a lot. But the second, and I think more obvious reason, is that there's a baseline of racist imperialism in this country that is just always going to be there. And it's largely partisan. It's largely Republican. Now, Fox News needs to, keep the juices flowing, keep the, dopamine rush going. But ultimately that's a given, right? I think what I cite is there's a PPP poll from 2015 that shows 30% of Republicans support bombing Aragba, the fictional country from Aladdin. So there's a kind of baseline reptile brain race that we're sort of dealing with that doesn't need a lot of convincing. And that's kind of always at 45%. But to do a genocide, right, with this level of as you say, barbarism and savagery for this long, with the Democrat in office, you need bipartisan consensus. And the way you get to that 55, 60% to get bipartisan consensus is you have to convince the liberal media and liberal institutions to go along with it. Or at the very least, you need to provide them cover for them going along with what they wanted to go along with anyway. And that's functionally where the intervention of liberal media comes in. It is a high leverage intervention. It's why you needed Jeffrey Goldberg to say, when he wrote for the New Yorker in 2002, that Saddam Hussein was in bed with bin Laden and helped do 9/11, right? There's a reason why you needed the New York Times editorial board and the New York Times pages to launder yellow cake uranium. you need liberal buy-in to really sell and make bipartisan these wars and genocides that necessarily have to be bipartisan for them to function over a longer period of time. And so in this sense, they're to use a baseball term, they're high leverage, right? There's a difference between going on the mound, with an 8-run lead, or going on the mound with a 1-run lead and 2 on and 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth. The liberals' interventions are high leverage. And this is a theme you see over and over again in this book, that when public sentiment starts to sway maybe more in favor of Palestine, then we get Jake Tapper talking about human shields. There's always these sort of, we get UNRWA's Hamas. So there's these high leverage interventions that liberal establishment media does over and over again, right as public opinion maybe starts to fray a little bit. And then we're kind of knocking down that series of lies before we move on to the next one. And so liberal media's role was crucial here. The reason why I focused on U.S. liberal media or establishment media is because we just had limited resources. I would have liked to have included, Canadian or British, kind of Anglo-American sphere media, which has been just as bad. But, it's obviously a fundamentally American genocide in key ways. And the political pressure, especially on Biden, providing a relief valve for that political pressure was their essential function, which gets to your question of how they sort of what the nature of this propaganda was. And what's important to understand is that for the most part, the propaganda, and I go over this when I discuss the moats of rationalization, they weren't really trying to defend the genocide on first principles. They weren't trying to defend it as such. And there was some effort perhaps in the first few weeks to do that. But by the time you got to November and December of 2023, it was really about getting pressure off about liberal establishment coming in and saying, well, we have to maintain the status quo because of X, Y, and Z. And the first moat of rationalization I discuss is this idea that, yes, it's sad. We can't deny the massive body counts, but Hamas uses human shields. This human shields rhetoric, again, popularized by people like Jake Tapper, the Washington Post, despite it not being endorsed by any human rights organization. The definition of a human shield being a guerrilla military in proximity to civilians is not a actual legal definition under international human rights law. It is not endorsed by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, nobody. It's simply a racist media thingamajig, which we can get into. And the second mode that really does a lot of the heavy lifting here, which really kind of begins to kick in around, I mean, you see seeds of it early, but this idea that Biden was helpless or that he was being manipulated by Netanyahu. And then the parallel with that was angry Biden or frustrated Biden. And then this began to coalesce with the fake ceasefire talks beginning in late February of 2024, early March 2024. And that really got the pressure off their backs, combined with a dozen other kind of mini interventions with respect to after the Al-Ali hospital bombing. You had the Hamas-run health ministry really provided a kind of liberal soothing mechanism. Then, of course, you had the policy at the CNN and the New York Times where you had to remove no longer they could ascribe Israeli responsibility for a bombing until the IDF positively confirmed it, which obviously makes the headlines less sensationalist or less outrageous because it's blasting Gaza, kills X, Y, and Z. And so all these things together were really about buying time and about reducing outrage. Now, internally, from sources we talk to and my own kind of inference based on other things we report, this wasn't put in sinister terms. It's not like the editors and producers at CNN and New York Times got together and said, how do we defend Biden from accusations of genocide? It's, we need to lower the temperature. We need to reduce anti-Semitism. And then, of course, as you got closer to November of 2024, it was, we can't let Trump back in the White House. So Biden's obviously made up his mind that we're going to go for broke on this. So our job is to basically work backwards from the assumption that the genocide is going to happen and try to protect him from his left flank as much as possible. And increasingly, it wasn't even a left flank. I mean, the anti-genocide coalition really became not a left-wing thing. It became very much a liberal or centrist thing. But you had to mystify, you had to create these sort of elaborate conspiracies about Netanyahu secretly working with Trump and other some such non sequiturs. And the reality is it mostly worked. It was the most successful public relations effort of my lifetime, specifically the sort of rebranding ceasefire to mean something completely different. For 5,000 years of warfare, ceasefire meant both sides cease firing. But then in February and March of 2024, it became Hamas surrenders and Israel gets everything at once. And anything short of that, we're going to keep murdering Palestinians ad infinitum. And that became a ceasefire, the sort of ostensible goal you were reaching for. And this book basically covers about how those mechanisms work. And so really, because people will often ask me, they'll say, well, wait a second, Israel is an 85-15 issue now with Democrats. Democrats overwhelmingly support it or oppose Israel. 70+% of Democrats think it's a genocide. So would you say that it was successful? And it's like, well, A, yes, because they accomplished their goal of ethnic cleansing and genocide to a large degree. But B, there was not people, you can't cover up that killing that many people that's being live streamed on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok every day. The goal very quickly became about buying time, about creating an elaborate regime of excuse making to try to remove it into the realm of non sequitur or sort of not an issue, which is what they teach you in Public Relations 101. So they showed up to make somewhat of a hacky metaphor. They show up. There's their client is standing over the murder victim with a bloody knife in their hand. They're not going to get him off entirely. So they try to go from murder one to manslaughter or self-defense. And so you see this kind of constant negotiation with, yes, this is bad. Yes, it's obviously horrific, but human shields, Biden's helpless. Actually, there's a ceasefire negotiation that's very mysterious and you don't understand it. And it's all very savvy. And a bunch of people in suits show up to the Middle East and that just kind of bought time over and over and over again. It got the pressure off the White House in concert with the smearing of and cracking down on campus protesters, which was the real vector of pressure. And then, of course, you have this elaborate, completely bizarro alternate universe of campus anti-Semitism discourse. And it mostly worked. And then once you get to June, July of 2024, you have this trolley problem framework where, well, we have to kind of look the other way at genocide because Trump will do genocide plus. Again, removing the agency from the people actually in charge who could stop it whenever they wanted. They didn't. What Trump would or wouldn't do was, of course, irrelevant to that moral equation. And this was propped up by people, as you mentioned, like Ocasio-Cortez, who kept asserting this premise that Harris had no agency, that she couldn't break from the White House, or Biden had no agency and couldn't change anything. And this helpless Biden narrative was, I think, crucial to really getting it over the finish line, to where once it was October and November, it was all over anyway.
Mm-hmm. Biden was, of course, only helpless when it came to Gaza. Otherwise, he was the greatest president of our lifetimes, who had pushed through this great progressive pro-labor, pro-working class agenda. So those were the contradictory themes that I recall from the campaign as well. There's so much in what you said there, Adam. One thing is, we're going to talk about this in a moment, the Israeli mass rapes hoax, as we assert that it is based on our research to this day. There is not a single verified case of an October 7th rape of a person, living or dead, to this day. But that hoax, it strikes me as, was designed to appeal to the liberal side of things, people who are concerned about, women's right and gender-based violence and all of those things, to kind of rally that support for Israel. That's just one reflection I have listening to you. And the other is, we can actually show an example of a New York Times headline that references what you mentioned a few minutes ago. Tamara, we can put up this headline that is right there. Explosion Gazans say was airstrike, leaves many casualties in dense neighborhood. What are you seeing in that headline, Adam, before I go on to my question?
One cannot overstate the importance of the Al-Ali hospital bombing story and the subsequent Crybaby campaign on October 17th, 2023. So if you recall, there was, I think, very obviously an Israeli shelling of a hospital in Gaza that left 300 to 400 dead, or killed 300 to 400 people. And the Israelis argued, this was an errant PIJ rocket. Again, despite the fact that no rocket from Gaza had ever killed, I think, more than 3 or 4 people at once, they suddenly 100x that and killed 300 to 400 people in a massive explosion in a hospital. And the New York Times said, and I'm not getting the exact quote here, but airstrike in Gaza on hospital, kills X, according to Gaza health officials. And CNN ran a similar headline. And then this kind of got indexed into a fog of war, who's to say, he said dynamic. And then the normal, your camera, your honest reporting, your ADL, they immediately went into turbocharged into this crybaby
pro-Israel groups.
Yeah, sorry, pro-Israel, the sort of crybaby lobby, the sort of everything's anti-Semitic, everything's blood libel, because they assume that the country dropping 99.99999% of the bombs was responsible for the bombing, as by the way was the standard in every war zone in the history of war zones, and remains the standard, incidentally, in other war zones that are not related to Israel. And then two policies are introduced at the New York Times and CNN, and I believe others, but these are the ones for which we have direct reporting, both Daniel Boguslaw and The Intercept, and then my own sources. The first change is, as I mentioned earlier, you had to positively confirm with the Israeli military that they were responsible for a bombing before you attributed it to Israel.
And we always know that the Israeli army tells the truth about everything, right?
Indeed. And CNN had an added layer where you had to have GPS coordinates of the bombing itself. From then on. So that's why when people wonder why you keep getting all these blast explosions, these sort of mysterious explosions that come out of nowhere, that was policy. That was policy from the top down. And Mark Thompson reflected that policy as well at CNN, the president of CNN. And then a second thing happened, which I think was probably just as pernicious, which was the introduction of the term Hamas-run health ministry, or some variations thereof. Now, from October 7th to October 17th, Hamas-run was not a term used on any cable network. It was not used in the New York Times. It wasn't used anywhere. But then after the @Ali hospital bombing and the subsequent 𝐓𝐶rybully campaign, it explodes in usage. You see everyone use it almost all at once. My assumption is that it's because the ADL or CAM or these other groups basically said,
and the Biden administration, as I recall,
and the Biden administration begins to use it as well. And of course, he cast doubts on the death count. He supposedly later apologizes to like Muslim leaders behind closed doors, but he never does it publicly. Now, this is a classic example of it's what I call liberal genocide denial. It's a classic example of kind of how liberal propaganda works, because it is technically accurate, but it is wildly misleading. And of course, everyone knows that the Hamas-run health ministry, quote unquote, has a history of being extremely accurate, if not a massive undercount. There was a study done after Protective Edge in 2014 that compared the IDF's official death count with that of the so-called Hamas-run health ministry, and there was a difference of 7%. Of course, Hamas-run health ministry, quote unquote, have been used by the World Health Organization, by Human Rights Watch, by the State Department, and as we later learned, by Mossad itself. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I apologize for interrupting, but on this point, there's something that, again, people who are familiar with how things are reported in Gaza would know, and journalists should know if they were doing their jobs, which is that because Gaza is still effectively under Israeli military occupation and control, Israel controls the population registry for Gaza, and Israel issues basically the identity cards for everyone in Gaza. And so when the health ministry in Gaza releases a list of people who have been killed, it includes their full name, what we call their quadrilateral name, first name, father's name, grandfather's name, and family name, and their ID number. And the ID number is contained in the Israeli Interior Ministry database.
Right.
And at no time did Israel come out and say that any of the names or ID numbers released by the health ministry in Gaza were false. That data can't be falsified.
And here's what's important to understand is that everybody knew this. Like everyone knew this in the newsrooms, and sources we talked to confirm this. And there was pushback from some people, of course, not enough, and then nobody went public. So take it for what it's worth. But everybody knew that it was a pejorative to cast aspersions on the, again, increasingly massive death counts, 400-500 people a day. There was one day, of course, that was 1,000. And they needed this to they needed to provide a kind of liberal SSRI for people to kind of get through the carnage. And Hamas-run did that trick. And eventually they sort of just dropped it. New York Times and CNN slowly phased it out over 2025 because everybody knew it was bullshit and it didn't matter. But the explosion of Hamas-run as this, again, because clearly Hamas is indexed as like an ISIS-like terror group, you would think, oh, Hamas-run, well, then if it's 500, it's really like 100 or really like 50 or really 20. Because they're just going to exaggerate everything because they're a bunch of boogie terrorists, and it worked. I mean, it largely did kind of take the pressure off Biden and the pressure off Israel. And so the Al-Ali hospital bombing and the Zionist 𝐓𝐶rybully campaign after that was really where I think you had a moment where, again, there was riots, there was mass uprisings in various cities. People were genuinely outraged at this hospital bombing. I know it seems we're a little nostalgic for when people actually felt outrage, because Israel largely gambled that people would grow numb to these outrages, and that was largely true, helped along by these pacification PR efforts. And that was a moment where people could have coalesced, because historically, as you know, Israel, when they bombed Gaza, it basically got to do some medieval recompense and kill some arbitrarily high number of Palestinians. And then eventually the US would say, okay, you're done. We're all moving on. And I think by this point, it was 6,000 had been killed in like 10 days. I mean, it was obviously very obscene. And then the assumption was, okay, this could be one of those moments where we all rally and say, and there's enough pressure on the White House to say, that's it, you're done. But there was a decision made to go all the way, to do a genocide. And then the reality had to comport with and distort with to please that decision. And that's why the hospital bombing, even though, again, forensic architecture details a dozen lies Israel tells over the next 48 hours. You have that fake phone call between PIJ militants where they have an Israeli accent. You have this completely absurd, forensics claims that don't make any sense based on historic evidence of PIJ rockets, which have never caused anywhere near that much damage. And then once that kind of passes and you have these reforms within media to sort of give the Israeli line, then I think at that point it was like there wasn't really anything else you could grab onto. And that I think was really the missed opportunity. It's an opportunity that we heard from several sources where it was like, once you basically did the genocide denial qualifier, once you basically made it so you could not write headlines where you talked about anything Israel did. Because obviously the emotive impact of Israel bombs hospital is going to be different than blast in hospital kills 15. It necessarily means the mechanisms of outrage that are the only real popular outrage, being the only real counter to this, we're going to be completely numbed, dulled, and removed from the equation. And that's ultimately what happened.
And it's interesting too. Interesting. It's despicable. Reading through your book the last few days and just being reminded of all of these instances where they were working overtime to placate and really manufacture consent for this genocide in so many ways, and especially the example you give of the Al-Ahli Arab hospital bombing, and really how that was a test to see how the media would help sell that, and then to go forward and subsequently destroy every single hospital and medical facility around Gaza. And all you needed to do was have CNN or MSNBC or The Atlantic say that Israel says there were, Hamas militants in the emergency room or whatever. And by a certain point, just a few weeks after the first massacre and destruction of a hospital, no one really cared anymore.
Right.
They didn't even have to give a
They didn't
pretext.
exactly.
No, they subsequently, again, then you had 𝐓𝐡𝐞, which was another great lie. Because again, there's not one WMD, there's dozens of mini WMDs. You have the Hamas command and control center that's supposed to look like a Bond villain lair, 3 stories, 3D render, all these rooms. And then they get there. Again, that was framed as a battle rages around hospitals, says the New York Times. Right. Of course, there was no battle because there was no Hamas fighters inside of the hospital itself. And in fact, when they just walked in, and then they said, well, wait, you said there was, oh no, they actually left a few days before. Okay. And then they get there, and of course, there's no command and control center. It was all a lie. Everybody knew it was a lie. The New York Times.
There was a calendar, though.
Yeah, there was a calendar.
Yeah. And then there was an effort to put lipstick on the pig, very shamefully, by the New York Times in February of 2024, where they mysteriously found new Israeli intelligence showing the Al-Shifa hospital compound. We can't really show you, but we have a graphic, and it doesn't actually have an opening in the hospital, but it's sort of vaguely the whole thing was a joke. That's not what they sold. And in paragraph 17, they say, no, to be clear, this does not comport with what Israel said at the time, which was. And everyone, I will say to the Washington Post credit, who is meaningfully better, still bad, but meaningfully better than the New York Times. In February of 2023, they do debunk the Al-Shifa hospital bullshit. They do a pretty exhaustive report saying nothing they claimed is here. This is all bullshit. They occupied it, half a dozen times throughout the various episodes of the genocide, and never once found any evidence of this so-called command and control center. And this was a theory, a conspiracy theory propped up by Biden's intelligence. They had John Kirby come out and say U.S. intelligence supports the theory that there was a Hamas command and control center or some such. And again, there was not a shred of evidence, no photographic evidence, nothing, no testimonies. People, again, tens of thousands of people had worked in Al-Shifa, and they said, I don't know what you're talking about. We would have known if this was a command center. And it didn't matter, because once that lie was exposed, once it was seen as a sieve, you just moved on to another lie. UNRWA's Hamas. There's another lie. There's, and so you were always trying to, there's no resources to counter all this. There's obviously some independent publications, and even those are under-resourced. So the torrent of lies just keeps going and going. And by the time you've moved on, what's important is that Israel as an institution can never be discredited as a source. So no matter how many blatant, obvious, self-serving lies they tell, it's still Israel claims X. And then the person denying it is never Human Rights Watch or some sort of liberal coded organization or, Doctors Without Borders. It's always Hamas denies these allegations, because they know full well that that's going to be indexed in people's heads as, oh, well, of course, they're a bunch of evil terrorists. And the tie goes to Israel all the time. And so the constant theme in this book is that liberals can't just say, I'm a Zionist, I support Israel, I support American imperialism. I don't like Arabs and I don't like Palestinians. That's considered tacky. That's considered not within this kind of universalist liberal framework. So what they do is they have ostensibly a value neutral universalist criteria that they simply apply completely differently to two different groups. And you see this with liberal institutions, whether it's universities or PEN America, where they all were gung-ho for Ukraine after Russia invaded Ukraine, and they were going to support human rights and stand up to bullies and oppressors. And they all issued statements, whether it was Harvard or Northwestern University or PEN America or the Opera of New York and Chicago, name your kind of liberal institution. And then as the body count rises and rises in October and November 2023, they all quietly issue statements of neutrality. Oh, we're actually neutral. Because you can't say I support Israel. You have to sort of act like you oppose politics as such, despite the fact that, again, post George Floyd and post, they all sort of gave these vacuous statements on being anti-racist and pro-Ukraine. And so you see this time and time again where there's these editorial standards that they're supposed to meet. On the one hand, for Palestinians, right? You could go on CNN and make any lurid, sensationalist claim about Palestinians, and no one ever called you out. You were always invited back on. Right. So Jonathan Greenblatt promotes the beheaded babies atrocity propaganda
from
days
the
after
ADL. He's the head
from
of
the ADL, the head of the
Defamation League, a pro-Israel group.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for that. He spreads it, and Joe Scarborough spreads it weeks after it's been debunked in Israeli right-wing media. You have people talking about babies in ovens on CNN with no pushback weeks after it's been debunked in right-wing media. Meanwhile, any story about Israel had to be triple vetted, had to go through the Jerusalem Bureau, which is under the shadow of Israeli censors.
And
of course it had.
Pete Buttigieg,
Please.
who is likely to be one of the next Democratic nominees, or one of the main contenders for the Democratic Party nominee, was repeating the beheaded babies lie, and I think it was as recently as this past November.
Yeah. Well, it's just an ism, because who's going to correct you? What institution? There's no Palestinian equivalent to AIPAC. You can say whatever the fuck you want to say. And this is something we come across time and time again, because if you call them out, you say, like, and I'll give you a comparable example of the Manab school bombing, because when Israel and the U.S. started bombing Iran earlier this year, the U.S. kind of got this Israeli standard by the transitive property. And the New York Times took 5 days to confirm it was an Israeli U.S. airstrike. Now, I know that they couldn't necessarily determine which one, but they could have just said U.S.-Israeli airstrike blows up school on the first day. Because again, the day after, there was a bombing from Iran that had hit a school and a synagogue in Jerusalem, and they didn't take any time to blame Iran for that. But they took 5 days, and I asked them. I said, why does it take you so long to confirm that this is a U.S. and Israeli airstrike? And they say, well, we follow protocol. We have to confirm it. And then you say, well, why don't you do that same protocol for Iran? And they have no answer. Because they can't just say we're in the tank for Israel, or that we're liberal Zionists. So they have to invent this kind of fake universal standard that they only apply to one side. And we heard this over and over again from sources. So at MSNBC, there's policies against anchors, even like perceived as being partisan anchors, on the topic of Gaza having a strong opinion. And there was one glaring exception. It was Joe Scarborough. Joe Scarborough could say whatever he wanted to do. The rules just simply did not apply to him. So this is one way we saw this over and over again, where there was ostensibly neutral rules against being perceived as too political or having strong opinions on Israel and Gaza, the so-called Gaza war. And it was only applied to people who were sympathetic to Palestinians. And if you were a Zionist, you could like the most batshit crazy or post the most batshit crazy Zionist propaganda, and you were never disciplined. And if you were pro-Palestine, even the most generic milquetoast like calls for humanitarian aid would get you fired over and over and over again. So this is really a kind of test case into liberal imperialism as a kind of, it makes these universalist claims of human rights, and it's just clearly bullshit. They're very clearly in the tank for one side, but they have to contort themselves and bend over backwards to act like they're calling balls and strikes.
Well, there is a lot in what you said, Adam. It's just incredible analysis, and we'll come back to some of those points. But I want to take us back to the New York Times. Now, that crazy headline we saw, explosion, Gazans say was airstrike, was from November 2023. But I want to show you now a headline that is from this week, and it is a column by Nicholas Kristof, and I'll read it out for those who are listening. The silence that meets the rape of Palestinians. And this is pretty remarkable that Kristof writes about the numerous first-hand testimonies given by Palestinians of horrific rapes and other sexual violence by Israeli soldiers and personnel against Palestinians in Israeli detention since October 7th. We covered that in depth a couple of weeks ago in our interview with Meher Husseini of Euromed for Human Rights, which did one of the recent landmark reports on Israel's systematic sexual crimes against Palestinians. And Tamara Nassar and I also wrote an article about that on the Electronic Intifada. Now, on the one hand, Nick Kristof is breaking a taboo because there have been virtually no mentions of the systematic, well-documented sexual violence by Israel against Palestinians. This includes hundreds of first-person testimonies with a lot of corroboration, as Meher Husseini explained when we spoke to her a couple of weeks ago. But on the other hand, in this same column, Nick Kristof gives credence to Israel's thoroughly debunked claims of mass rapes by Palestinians on October 7th. In other words, it has to be a both sides thing. He can't talk about the reality of Israeli rape and sexual violence against Palestinians without somehow balancing that out with reference to this fictional atrocity propaganda narrative about mass rapes on October 7th. And currently, the New York Times is facing a massive Israel lobby backlash with the participation of many of the groups you mentioned, like Honest Reporting, and other major Israel lobby groups, including apparently demands that Kristof's column be retracted. Notably, the Times has never retracted its fraudulent article, Screams Without Words, by Jeffrey Gettleman, which did so much to spread the October 7th mass rapes hoax. Literally every claim in that article has now been debunked or retracted. You do mention this issue. You don't go into it in great depth in the book, but you certainly talk about it. Adam, what's your view of this now, this controversy around Kristof's column, and put it into the context of your broader analysis of how the media functions?
I mean, to me, the biggest red flag is that the daily podcasts refuse to do a story on Screams Without Words. So like New York Times is clearly some other editor in the New York Times didn't think it was something they were going to put their name on. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of other issues with it, but that to me seems like the main issue, that is if you think it's substantive, you would think at the very least the internal podcast, which usually just kind of does promotes the output of the New York Times, which they were just coming off the Caliphate scandal. They didn't want to do that again. And so that to me speaks more than any kind of even out the third party debunking, as important as those are, because again, if the New York Times' own colleagues won't support it, I think that tells you all you need to know. which at least from a journalistic perspective is that it was incredibly thin, and incredibly the headline and the subheadline were way overselling what was actually in the story itself. Now, meanwhile, they have to. This is something we saw with the report about doctors talking about children being shot with snipers. Is they put this in the opinion section. Now, the Zionist crybabies are saying they put it in the opinion section because it has less of a fact check, which is not true. They fact check them both equally. Anyone who's ever known anyone who works at the New York Times knows that's true. It's because they probably that the opinion columnists have a lot of autonomy to do whatever they want to do. And I don't know what Nick Kristoff's internal motivations are. Maybe he's trying to like make up for some of the pro-genocide stuff he said, or his history of soft pedaling, or supporting sweatshops. I don't know if you remember the 2000s. His big thing was supporting sweatshops. By name, he would like have articles being like sweatshops are good. So I don't know what his internal motives are, but I think he kind of can act independently, is my assumption. And I do think that the New York Times has a lot of reputation laundering to do. There was a protest outside of, I think, the New York Times a few weeks ago, or maybe a few days ago, and a New York Times journalist held up a sign that says, "Did you read Nick Kristoff's piece?" or something. Like it. They need something to point to, I think, institutionally. And there's this what I call kind of 90-10 rule that good Western liberal propaganda is good at, which is it's not like state TV where it's just 100% schlock, where it has no credibility. They're good at like 90% state propaganda, but they'll have 10% dissent to kind of point to later when you say that they're just shills for Israel. And they did this occasionally.
Gives credibility to the rest.
That gives credibility to the 90%, which is why this is just, it's an issue of sophistication. It's not an issue of intent or motive. And I think this piece fits squarely within that, because like you mentioned, it has to sort of bracket it with, I mean, what is the only acceptable far left flank of liberal Zionism critiques you can make of Israel, which is, if you're not careful, you're going to end up like the savage Arabs. This is like the theme of Munich. It's the theme of a lot of liberal Zionist propaganda, which is like, oh my God, we're going to become like them. And that's kind of the way Kristoff frames it, that Israel and its kind of hot-headedness and its fervor is beginning to look like them. So it fits squarely within a kind of liberal Zionist reformist milieu. I will say some of the more, I guess you would say from their perspective, shocking claims about dogs being involved kind of crossed a line in beyond the kind of normal liberal Zionist acceptable playbook. So I think structurally it's the New York Times just kind of covering their ass. It's similar to other, because again, they had like 3 or 4 main sympathetic, very serious journalism pieces. Now they obscured Israel's role, but they at least kind of like did something critical throughout the genocide, because they need one for like every 10 that promotes some kind of lurid conspiracy theory or pro-Israel narrative or Israeli intelligence laundering. And so I fit it squarely within that. I think the fact that it came out in an opinion column is certainly evidence that it was not something that just sort of more ideologically Zionist reporting side would do. But I mean, that's kind of what I make of it. Certainly like the pylon on Nicholas Kristoff indicates that this does not fit safely within a Zionist milieu. It's bracketing of allegations against Palestinians notwithstanding. So, I think there's certainly a lot of people who feel like they've pulled their punches at the New York Times, who again, like through projects like y'all and others, have been pressuring them to like, because they read that shit. They always read that shit. Every source we've said to says they actually care a lot about that stuff. And I think they view their reputations as being shills for Israel.
You say they read that.
They read criticism. They read media criticism.
So I'm interested in that. So what can you tell us from your sources about the impact the criticism had? Because we can infer that it has had an impact, but they don't tell us. So I mean, I would say that first off, they certainly care way more about the Zionist crybabies because they're way more well resourced, and they have a direct line oftentimes to management. Whereas like left-wing media, but a lot of these journalists and a lot of these opinion columnists, they still want to be taken seriously as someone who is concerned with things like human rights and is concerned with a kind of universalist approach. So, I mean, to the extent to which I confer that they care about it is that the New York Times has responded to me more over the last 6 months than they've responded to me ever before. And I think they're very concerned, like they actually respond to me. Historically, they just ignore you, but they actually have responded to me on several different occasions now, either through my book or through my reporting or my analysis. And so my sense is that they kind of have that they know that they're perceived as being in the tank for Israel and supported what is an indefensible genocide.
And I think that there's attempts belatedly to kind of balance that out for their own PR brand management. And again, you saw this once Trump took office, right? When Trump took office, you did see more reporting on famine. You saw more reporting on certain, abuses here and there. And the editorial board or the opinion section, of course, like got more, I don't want to say they certainly didn't get anti-Zionist, but they got more left-wing liberal Zionists, if that makes sense. You had people like Ezra Klein talking about how it's a de facto one state and, making arguments that y'all were making 20 years ago. As if by the way, he was acting like this was an idea he heard in 2022, and he acted like he had discovered the Da Vinci Code. And I'm like, I think I remember reading that on Electronic Intifada 20 years ago. And so it's like, why would they do that? Why is that? Now, on one hand, there probably is a legitimate intellectual and moral crisis within Zionism that they are kind of litigating in the New York Times. But I think a lot of it is to just cover their ass and to sort of do this one bad man theory with Netanyahu. Because I think there's a narrative shaping, and I allude to this in my conclusion. There's a narrative kind of emerging of like, how do we preserve the Zionist project and Israel's image overall? And we're going to make Netanyahu the one bad man as a kind of sin eater for everything else. B, we're going to do this narrative that, after October 7th, everybody was hot-headed and they overreacted. But now we can sort of move on. And you see J Street trying to peddle a lot of this stuff now because we cannot fundamentally ask the fundamental questions about the logic and nature of Zionism. So what we're getting is a lot of like self-flagellation and self-criticism that is very limited to a specific ideological framework. And I suppose I would put this Christoph piece in that framework with an understanding that it did go a little bit further than that with respect to the like depravity and the visceralness of the descriptions. But again, it's buried in a very muted headline. Again, to compare that to Screams Without Words, which had this idea of an active, deliberate policy of rape, that's not put in this headline. It's kind of seen as this. Maybe you could even write it off as rogue elements. So again, it doesn't have the agency or impact or deliberateness of Screams Without Words in its headline. So it's certainly
it is also in the opinion section,
and it's also in the opinion section,
which I read as this was, whatever his motivations may be, they may have been well-meaning and sincere. They may be more calculating, but it was Nick Christoph's choice to do this. Is the way I understand it, as an individual with a lot of clout at the New York Times. He is a well-established columnist who probably has more autonomy than most. What is most telling to me is that at no time in the past 3 years has the news department decided to report on the many well-documented reports of sexual violence against Palestinians, along with a host of other abuses. But this one in particular, given the fact that they have spent so much energy on promoting the Israeli claims, which turn out to have nothing behind them. And
so I will say in late summer of 2024, there was initial reports of sexual violence in
Sderot
in Israeli prisons of Palestinians. And the New York Times had a grand total of 4 mentions of that story. And this is in contrast to 76 different articles alleging Palestinian sexual violence. And the Washington Post had 5 versus a total of 22, and Politico had 0 versus 24. This is the 3 months after those respective events took place, or supposedly took place. So what they're good is they're kind of doing it. They have one article in section 824 where they kind of cover it and then center all the Israeli denials. So they kind of cover their base. But then, of course, with Screams Without Words and the subsequent reporting, it was central. I mean, they had a lot of opinion and editorial, which we didn't even include in that count, that reaffirmed this as well, from Michelle Goldberg and others. And it was so they're very good at like box checking, but it's not a moral narrative. It's not an urgent moral narrative in need of a corrective, which in this case obviously is just ceasefires are bad and let's just eliminate Hamas, and whatever follows from that. It's just a reluctant mass casualty event.
And and as you said at the beginning of this interview, these newsrooms act as if the clock started, the calendar started on October 7th. There is no historical context. There is no, decades and decades and decades of de facto policy by the Israelis inside these torture camps, these prisons, of using sexual torture and rape against Palestinians for decades. And so I wonder if you can talk, we only have, a few minutes left, but we have so much more that we want to ask you. We want you to talk about how, you describe in your book, How to Sell a Genocide, several revealing episodes of newsroom discipline after October 7th. At MSNBC, you have Martin Fletcher, the veteran reporter, who was brought in to brief MSNBC staff and enforce a pro-Israel line. At CNN, the management ordered that anything connected to Israel or Palestine had to be cleared through the notorious pro-Israel Jerusalem Bureau, which you mentioned before. And you also quote a source summarizing the editorial message in 3 words: "We don't want context." I guess that's 4 words. We don't want context. What do these episodes tell us about how mainstream outlets manage coverage from the top down, not only by using and shaping language and sourcing, but by actively suppressing history, omitting context, narrowing permissible analysis, and policing what journalists were allowed to say, especially about the Palestinian struggle against Israeli colonization?
We were blessed to have several high up sources at MSNBC, as probably not a huge surprise to you, because I think much of the people who worked there are kind of ashamed of what their coverage was. But on the morning of October 7th, you have Ali Valshi at the anchor desk, and you have Ayman Mohyeddin brought in because he had lived in Gaza. He actually reported from Gaza in 2014. And as it's unfolding, they start giving context. They're not endorsing it. They're not cheerleading it, but they're saying, here's why there would be an attack or an escape, as it were, from Gaza. And they say, here's the history, put on a diet, mow the lawn, they sort of give context. All hell breaks loose. It is the first, and since last time, that Comcast corporate, which owns MSNBC, ever directly intervenes in coverage. They call in Rashida Jones and Cesar Conde, or the head of MSNBC and NBC News, respectively, and they say, never do that again. The next day, they bring in Martin Fletcher, who had family who died on October 7th, and who had served in the IDF, and who was a longtime Middle East correspondent with pretty open allegiances to Israel. He comes in and gives a news-wide call with all of MSNBC and NBC News, and the management says, you now go to him if you need to know anything about this so-called conflict, right? He gives the line. He says Palestinians are not real. They weren't invented until 1967. Jews are the actual real Palestinians. Israelis left greenhouses in Gaza when they left, and Hamas used them to build all the kind of Zionist propaganda you get. And this becomes the party line you have to abide by. I mean, quite explicitly, you have to reference them or call them if there's a question you have about Gaza. Martin Fletcher, that is. And this clampdown on context is something we heard over and over and over again. That context was perceived as terrorist apologia, that it was pro-Hamas to provide context. You were justifying the deaths of October 7th. Now, of course, so the clock has to start on the morning of October 7th. But of course, any context about what preceded that was viewed as either implicitly or explicitly being pro-Hamas. And then CNN
very similar to it reminded me very much of the atmosphere after the September 11th 2001 attacks. Context was forbidden. History was forbidden.
Well, history has to start on the day. And then Mark Thompson, the head of CNN, sends out a memo on October 26th where he confirms an existing policy already, but it's the one we have evidence of, reported on in The Intercept, saying anytime you mention the Palestinian death count or any war crime in Palestine or anything bad and any death in Palestine, you must front load it with a death count from October 7th. So everything has to be bracketed with this October 7th death count, and you can't ever start the clock before that, right? There's no inverse, right? Every time you mention October 7th, you have to mention the 523 kids killed in Protective Edge, or you have to mention the 40 children killed in the West Bank from January 1st to October 6th, 2023, or the hundreds of killed in the West Bank from January 1st to October 6th, 2023. That doesn't work that way. It doesn't work the opposite way. It only works one way. So the clock has to start, right? History starts on this day, and anything that explains it or tries to explain Hamas's motivations or the other militant groups' motivations as anything other than mindless anti-Semitism and jihadist bloodlust is strictly and literally forbidden from these newsrooms. Another mechanism they used to discipline, which I thought was not very sophisticated and is just maybe somewhat white of me, but I was a little surprised how hacky it was they kind of just used race as a proxy. If you were Arab or Muslim, especially if you were young and Arab and Muslim, or you were even South Asian or just kind of vaguely Muslim coded, you were immediately just taken off the Gaza beat and not allowed to not only report on it, but your social media would be interrogated with a fine-tooth comb, oftentimes by people within the newsroom, not even management, looking to advance. They would kind of snitch on their other their colleagues. And so there was, and of course you had outside pressure. You had these fanatical groups doxing journalists who were questioning the narrative on social media, and then the newsrooms not standing up for them and in fact blaming them for inviting it. You have a lot of vigilantism. People with, these people who were questioning the beheaded babies had vans pull up to their house with in front of, outside their kids' schools and outside their home with pictures of their face, saying that they were, rape apologist or baby terrorist apologist. And newsrooms did nothing to push back against that. They sort of looked the other way while this was happening. So there was all kinds of pressure immediately to go along with the narrative. And anyone who, and the extent to which you could deviate from the narrative slightly, it was you had to do this kind of what Adam Curtis calls oh dearism, where it's like, oh, this is sad, people are dying, but there's no real agent, there's no causal agent, there's no like discussion of Zionism, or it's kind of it's inherent logic or it's inevitable outcomes. Everything
it's treated like an earthquake, as you write in the
treated
book.
like an earthquake, because that's the closest you could get to being sympathetic. So you could sort of feel bad, but there was no causal agent. And to the extent there was, it was because of the October 7th attacks, where time began, where there was a sort of big bang that happened, and everything followed from that, and nothing precedes that.
I've mentioned this before, Adam, I believe probably on this live stream, but again, it's just through my lens. But it gives a sense of things that it also tells you how long I've been doing this kind of work. But during the during the second Intifada, that's in the early 2000s, I was routinely, not very regularly, but it was not uncommon that I was invited into mainstream media. And you can go back and find interviews with me on CNN, MSNBC, Hannity and Combs on Fox, on various NPR affiliates, and I would be called up by mainstream newspapers from time to time, or even asked, they would approach me and say, would you write a column on what's going on? And I would say that through to the 2014 Israeli war on Gaza, I would still be called by the BBC World Service. I remember doing interviews with the BBC and various other mainstream networks. That probably stopped sometime before October 7th, 2023. But since October 2023, I have not been approached by a single mainstream outlet in the West. Not one.
Well,
and
they don't want to hear from you, obviously.
Yeah, of course they don't want to hear from me. I'm big bad Ali Abounem. I get that, but it's you would say objectively, I'm someone who's written books on this. I've written about this for several decades. I'm someone who you can bring on for a perspective. You don't have to endorse it, but you could have it as part of the mix. Obviously, it's not about me, because that absence has been almost total of Palestinians in the Western media. Meanwhile, I'm invited on by international, non-Western networks all the time, or Western adjacent.
I mean, and this is backed up in the data quite a bit. I mean,
well, that's again, what I wanted to ask you before we get to our final question. But is this an accident? What does your data tell you?
Well, there has, first off, we studied the Sunday morning shows, because that's the kind of where you really set the agenda, and it's a good metric. And Meet the Press on NBC, ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and CNN's Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, which I'm sure is no shock to you, have not had a single Palestinian guest since the genocide began. Last I studied it was 2 years ago, but I went back and looked at it again. It's been obviously over 2.5 years. And they have not had a single Palestinian guest. So they couldn't even find like a native informant that would occasionally write for the Atlantic. There was one guest once in November of 2023. I think it was the British ambassador from Palestine. And that was it. And they were on for 5 minutes and that was it. So CBS Face the Nation has since not had one, and certainly won't have one now that Barry Wise is in charge. And it seems like, and again, the opening vignette is of Nora Barrows-Friedman and her experience where she gets basically has auditioned for her humanity on BBC and CNN, where she's basically asked to condemn Hamas before they even talk to her. And one reason I suspect, talking with her and other sources, is that when they vet people to come on, they say, do you condemn Hamas? And will you do so on air or some variation thereof? And I think that once you have that as your litmus test, especially since that's ostensibly the military justification for the genocide of their people, you're going to get a very, very narrow group of people. And in fact, State of the Union with Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, the supposedly, middle-brow agenda-setting show, has not had a Palestinian on since July of 2019, almost 7 years. And it was Rashida Tlaib, and at the time, Jake Tapper asked her on 3 separate occasions if she would, if she believed in Israel's right to exist. Again, a right that is literally the existent reason why her family was dispossessed and removed off the land that they lived on. So there's a humiliation ritual to this that I think maybe did not exist prior to this, where basically a lot of these Zionists, because again, everything has to have a sort of ostensibly liberal reason to exist. I think ADL and others have basically said, have on as many Palestinians as you want, but they have to denounce Hamas, or they have to denounce terrorism, or some other such racially loaded nonsense term. And of course, there's no corollary demand that Zionists denounce Israel or denounce IDF or even denounce IDF war crimes, because again, if you're a liberal Zionist, you can just line item veto whatever you want. So like you can't, you can say, well, this is bad, but I support them in theory. So it's a quantum Zionism. It's kind of whatever you need it to be at that moment. And that I think has really made it such that they can have like the occasional PA official on, but like really it's basically nobody. And some of the early weeks when they did have people like 𝐓𝐡𝐞 on, they basically humiliated them such that they either didn't want to come back on, or they would push back. I mean, again, Nora 𝐓𝐡𝐞 had a back and forth at ABC News that they took offline because they said it made their anchor look bad, but what they meant is it made their anchor look stupid. So I think there's a lot of like prerequisite auditioning for humanity that's framed as like anti-Semitism that has basically made it impossible. That's kind of my guess based on sources I've talked to. And also just, again, you're allowed to be a victim. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to talk about death, but you're not allowed to question any premises of Zionism that, again, an ideology that necessarily requires you to accept your own third and fourth class status. And once you eliminate that from the equation, it's just, there isn't like a lot of native informants to pick from like there is in other countries.
So Palestinians are allowed to be earthquake victims, but they're not allowed to be seismologists.
Yeah,
there you go.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So Adam, just there's so much more we can talk about, and that's a good reason why, there's so much in the book, How to Sell a Genocide. And so we could talk to you all day, but we're going to wrap up with sort of a bigger question, kind of a big picture question. And I want to return to that quote from your introduction where you wrote, "I will attempt to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the genocide in Gaza was enabled, facilitated, and cheered by establishment U.S. media providing cover for months of a nihilistic campaign of starvation, bombing, arbitrary detention, shooting, and sexual violence." That's what you set out to do. And the book makes that case very convincingly. At the same time, Adam, there is another story to tell. In spite of all this torrent of propaganda and the media's role in spreading it, popular support for Israel and for U.S. aid to Israel has fallen to historic lows. And for the first time that I've ever seen, polls are showing majorities of Americans now expressing more sympathy for Palestinians than for Israel. And even on the right, opposition to Israel is growing and coming out into the open. These are truly historic shifts in public opinion, even if they're not reflected in U.S. policy. given the enormous propaganda role of the mass media, how do you explain this shift? Does it show us the limits of mass media influence? Does it show us that independent media is playing a significant role? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, as I alluded to it earlier, I think that you can't kill over 100,000 people and do so and maintain your standing as you were before. Like, so therefore, what I mean by selling the genocide is I quite literally mean that. It's not just a provocative title. They needed to sell the premises of it by any means they felt they needed to do. So at first, it's Israel's right to defend itself, and then that ceases to have liberal credibility. So then you move on to Biden's helpless, and that seeks to have credibility. You move on. Well, Biden's really mad, but he's actually secretly working on a ceasefire. So you sort of just keep trying to buy time, because on first principles, everybody knows this was indefensible. Like, very few people, the Biden White House itself didn't even really defend it on principle. They sort of mumbled their way through the first principles or kind of the logic of it, and then immediately went on to, well, we're working on a ceasefire. So certainly, like, there are limits to what mainstream corporate media can do, and there's certainly limits to what sort of, Hasbara like 101 can do. I definitely think that we're moving into a new phase of more sophisticated mitigation, like damage control and reformism. And that's why I think you're getting this J Street line about cutting off aid to Israel, right? Remove it to the non sequitur. Never mind that you're still going to, sell them weapons and militarily support them. So it's just an accounting trick. It doesn't actually change anything, but it plays well. It polls well. And in groups like J Street and CIP and Matt Duss are pushing it because it's a way of preserving the foundations of Zionism and liberal Zionism while looking like you're distancing yourself from the horrors of Gaza. And you're getting, again, all the 2028 Democratic candidates are still going to do the one bad man theory. And Netanyahu led him astray. So there's ways of kind of salvaging it for another 4 years. And I think that's maybe what they think they really need, just 4 to 8 more years. But certainly, the support as such is terminal. I mean, you can't you can't do this in such a grotesque and horrific manner and just kind of come out unscathed. And maybe they make some effort to rebrand, and there's some other war with Iran that maybe creates more sympathy or something. I don't know, but that goose is cooked. And I think what you're in right now is you're in damage control. They're trying to go from murder 1 to manslaughter. And I think that the liberal institutions, such as they are, if you look at what they're producing and what they're putting out, and what politicians are beginning to say, is they are settling on, as I mentioned earlier, this scapegoating Netanyahu, this idea that they just need Jon Elmer did this in a bit that was otherwise decent on Gaza. At the end, he says the solution is to get Netanyahu out of power. Again, never mind that Netanyahu is to the left of most of Israeli society on key issues. And so you're getting this limited hangout kind of liberal Zionist propaganda that I think is sophisticated and just enough to buy time, because, again, even if people say they're more sympathetic with Palestinians than Israelis, that there's still a lot of gray area there with how that's interpreted from a political standpoint. Whether it be, oh, well, I support Israel in principle, or I support their right to defend themselves, therefore we should still send them, weapons or defensive weapons, or maybe we don't pay for it, but they pay for it. So I think all these compromises can kind of get you to a liberal Zionist consensus for long enough to where that those erosions aren't maybe that important. And that's why I think it's very, very important that we stay on what that is, that we say, no, you need baseline litmus tests to make sure that you're not bullshitting me. Even supporting BDS, which is like a moral chip shot. If a politician doesn't do that, then I would take nothing they say afterwards seriously about Israel or Gaza. So you're getting a lot of crocodile tears. You're getting a lot of one bad man theory, because obviously this is going to play out in the 2028 primary, such as it is, where everyone's going to want to look like they're anti-Israel while still not being too anti-Israel, such that the mainstream media and the Democratic establishment comes after them. And we need to just remain very vigilant about those mechanisms of propaganda, because they're going to get more. The second that J Street announced their plan to cut U.S. military to Israel, again, 4 months after Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham suggested the first thing, I thought, wow, that's really clever. I wish, I'm surprised I didn't think of that, because that's what I would have done. Because it kind of, again, it sounds good. It superficially sounds good. Most people hear cut off aid, they think you're cutting them off.
Rahm Emanuel suggested.
Rahm Emanuel did it as well. So we need to be on top, and obviously y'all are on that already, but we just need to be on top of what that is, what that looks like, because I think that's going to be how I think buying time is the name of the game. And right now they're going to just keep, as long as they can buy 5-10 years, I think they can carry out what they view as their end game, which is to overthrow the government in Iran, or reduce it to a sectarian civil war, and then mow down the rest of Lebanon. And then they think they can just have various Abraham Accords, and that's effectively to them the end of history. So I think that's something they think they can probably wrap up in 10 years or 20 years. So I mean, they say this openly, like, I'm not speculating. This is the goal. And so it's one thing to have anger at Israel. It's one thing to have anger at the genocide, and it's another to channel it into like coherent opposition politically.
Yeah. Well, speaking of time, buying time and passing time, I think we've just done the longest single conversation in the history of the Electronic Intifada live stream, and it went by in a flash, which tells me a couple of things. One is that your analysis is so rich, Adam, and I've been listening to it for years, to you and Nima Shirazi on the Citations Needed podcast. So if people want to get more, they can find that there. And of course, they should check out your book, How to Sell a Genocide. It's available now. People can also ask their local libraries to order it so we can get it in front of as many people as possible. It's really an incredibly well-researched book, full of insight, as people can hear from listening to you, Adam. And I hope that we'll have you back on. I think we waited too long to have you on the live stream, but you've got a lot to say, and it's all very thoughtful. So I hope we can have you back on again. In the meantime, we know you're doing a lot of speaking about the book, so good luck, and we wish you great success with that.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Yeah, an incredible interview.
Brilliant.
And yeah, I mean, just giving people like the wizard behind the screen sort of view of how corporate media uses language, uses time, uses power to shape narratives in order to placate the American public and make genocide something consumable for them. Just incredible. His book is great, and I'm really glad we had him on.
Me too.
Yeah.
And he and Nima Shirazi, well worth listening to on the
One of the
Citations Needed podcast. They analyze the media on this issue, but on all issues, and how it works and how it functions is the main way of shaping people's thinking.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking
but there's
of
a
which,
couple of updates. Yeah. So, we talked about the Nick Kristof column, which gave prominent place to the Israeli sex crimes against Palestinians. And one update on that, since we recorded that conversation with Adam, is that today Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, said that he instructed my legal advisors to consider the harshest legal action against the New York Times and Nicholas Kristof. They defamed the soldiers of Israel and perpetuated a blood libel about rape, trying to create a false symmetry between the genocidal terrorists of Hamas and Israel's valiant soldiers. Under my leadership, Israel will not be silent. We will fight these lies in the court of public opinion and the court of law. And just the inversion and reversal there is just
every
crazy.
accusation,
But
right? Yeah.
every accusation. But it goes to show how damaging the truth is to Israel, and it will go to any length. Of course, it's gone to the most extreme length of all, which is systematically murdering journalists in Gaza.
Yeah.
But this isn't what it will do even to the New York Times, which is its most effective propaganda outlet and shield. The New York Times is by far Israel's biggest media asset in the United States, if not the world, far more effective and useful than Fox News, for example. But at the same time that this controversy and the Israeli anger and backlash and cry bullying, as Adam Johnson calls it, over the Nick Kristof column has been going on, at the same time, Israel has been trying to reboot its rape hoax. It's October 7th rape hoax. And you can see all the headlines there that just from the last 24, 48 hours. And these are all promoting a new report by Israel's so-called civil commission, headed by 𝐄𝐤𝐿 𝐄𝐤𝐿. And loyal and longtime viewers will recognize that name. She is one of these October 7 grifters who set up this so-called civil commission, which has no official status at all. And it just published its report. And I've seen even in the column, in the comments while we've been on air today, people saying, Ali, you need to debunk this new report. Well, guys, I spent 14 hours doing that yesterday, barely getting up from my desk. Our colleague Michael Brown is going through my draft now. I'm showing you how the sausage is made. He's going through my draft now with a fine-tooth comb, because we want to make sure we get things right. And so we will publish that debunking of the new rape hoax, or effort to reboot the rape hoax. We'll try to get that up on the Electronic Intifada website later today or tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. And maybe we'll come back and talk about it a little bit next week as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Ali. It's just, it's so depraved that that they keep trying to trot out this this story that has no teeth, that has no evidence, no victims, no witnesses, no testimonies, nothing.
Yeah, and it's
they
just
expect people to buy it.
this new report is a rehash of all those lies, and but it's being packaged in a way that all the mainstream media are pushing it again, maliciously or credulously, but I think maliciously, because they have to know at this point that this is a hoax. But you can't get that without going through it the way we do. That's what we do. Unfortunately, repeatedly. But we will keep doing it. I said before, we will do this as long as necessary.
Yeah. Thanks, Ali. All right, let's bring on Jon to talk about what the resistance has been doing as long as necessary, especially in Lebanon. Hi, Jon.
Hello. I've been back here in the green room for that interview, editing Hezbollah videos that come faster than
the drones themselves.
For today or for next week?
For next week.
My gosh.
Okay.
I wake up to 8 a day. So.
Well, let's give us the sense of what you're going to be covering. I mean,
a lot of drone strikes.
So much.
It's really remarkable. We've been watching now 10 weeks. I'm going to cover the 10th week of the battle in South Lebanon and the development and adaptation on the battlefield of these Hezbollah built drones carrying anti-tank warheads. It's been a very impressive display by the resistance. It's completely changed the battlefield. I mean, we consider that they maybe used 5 in the entire first 2 years of the war, and then to now be, deploying them several a day, and then there's a camera on each of them. So all of these attacks we get to witness. So
not even a time delay. That's incredible.
Yeah.
All right, Ali, do the honors.
Take it away, Jon.
All right. So you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report on day 951 of Israel's genocide in Gaza and day 73 of Hezbollah's defense of South Lebanon. I'm going to be covering week 10 of the battle here, and we'll get right into it with the maps as usual. So people understand where the areas of fighting. If we start on the left in the western coast, Nakura, and up at the Ras al-Bayada headlands, we'll see those on film this week. That's where a lot of operations have been taking place. Bintaj Bail still has operations. Israel is demolishing Bintaj Bail now, as they're doing with 55 villages all along just above the blue line that you see there. And then real concentrations of a battle along the western edge of the Galilee Panhandle, which is on the right-hand side there, that goes up, juts up into Lebanon, Israeli territory that's topped up with Metula there, all from that coast, from Hula north, all through those valleys and up to the Litani riverbed has been the main three areas of conflict. The Israelis still are deploying 6 divisions, or parts of 6 divisions at least. I've said this many times, but we don't believe it's not believable that Israel is getting full reserve. Their reserve complement of soldiers are not all deploying. The Israeli chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, is still talking about the collapse of the Israeli military, that it's unable to handle these sustained operations over these past 2.5 plus years of genocidal rampage. But that's what they are doing in Lebanon as well. What we saw in Gaza, it's the same army, same people, same decision makers. And so their decision is they cannot defeat the resistance, and so they attack the civilians. They destroy civilian homes. They apply what used to be called the Dahia doctrine, but is now being called the Beit Hanun or Rafah doctrine, where you completely destroy every single thing in the town. And Beit Jbeil right now is being set up for that. If we look at the next map, well, I've shown you this one before too, but it's good to see these were the 5 positions that Israel set up inside Lebanon during the last purported ceasefire, which again is not a ceasefire in any way. But those are forward positions inside Lebanon that Israel has been able to use to advance. So even the hundreds of meters to a few kilometers that Israel has crossed the border into Lebanon is it's mitigated by the fact that these positions were already inside Lebanon. So the resistance has not allowed them to advance deep into this territory below the Litani River, which Israel at the beginning of this war promised that they were going to take control of. They pretty quickly after that adjusted and said they were just going to make a buffer zone, a security zone. And the security zone, that's the same language as the late 1980s and 1990s period, where South Lebanon was a security zone and Hezbollah's resistance drove the Israelis out of South Lebanon. And when I say drove them out, I mean literally. They left their computers, the soldiers left their computers, their uniforms hung up. They turned on their heels and ran down the hill. That's how the occupation of South Lebanon ended. And so there is a point of reference for that for people. And Hezbollah has leaned into that during these past number of weeks, releasing psychological operations videos that that show the carnage from Hezbollah operations in the 1990s and how they created a climate within Israel that the force could just not stay. The occupation was impossible. They couldn't defeat the resistance and they withdrew. So there is a point in history that is being looked upon by both the Israelis and the Lebanese. Let's take a look at the next one, number 2 here. This is Beit Jbeil being erased, satellite image of it. This is by an Israeli military adjacent open source mapper, Ben-Zion Makalas, and you can see this is just from these past 2 months, and you can see the destruction in that, the before and after. Just looks like what we started every resistance report in Gaza with, this kind of report of the destruction. And in this week that I'm covering, everything you're going to see is happened in the past week. And as ever, so we will do that like we always do. Let's take a look at the next one, because this is the Ministry of Health. These stats get released early in the week, so for our production schedule, they're already out of date by the time they're published. By the time by the time you see us on this show. So this is as of the 10th. They come out each week at the beginning of the week, and what we're looking at here is 11,539 casualties, almost 3,000 killed when you take the last few days in. But of course, also like Gaza, it's the same army, same generals, same politicians. You see that the healthcare sector is the prime target. 16 hospitals damaged or destroyed, 3 shut down entirely, 139 attacks on paramedics, which have 139 paramedics killed, 212 wounded, 27 paramedic stations attacked and destroyed, 130 ambulances destroyed, and like I said, 16 hospitals. And that is the way that they have been fighting this war. And when we're about to watch more than a dozen Hezbollah drone videos. But it's just worth noting what the Israelis used their drones for this week. They used a drone to attack a father and his daughter, his young daughter. The first strike destroyed the car and injured both of them. They both ran from the car. The second strike killed the father, and the drone chased the young girl down and killed her as well. So you're going to see a very strong juxtaposition between the resistance targeting only Israeli military targets and the Israelis targeting almost exclusively civilian targets. So that's 3. Let's take a look at number 4. This is a good video. This was from last Wednesday. It's just a good video because it's a good, crisp digital video feed here, so we can see really clearly a number of things. The way that they have torn up the roads to get rid of the IEDs. There's a direct hit right there on the loader's hatch. So we see them targeting in specific places on these tanks. But as I predicted last week, I thought we were going to start to see more softer targets, more troop positions hit than these shots on these tanks. When the tanks are zipped up, are really difficult operations. As I talked about before, we can look at number 5. Just to show you the you could see on this one on the left there, you could see the trophy active protection system the launcher had turned to face the drone, but obviously wasn't able to engage it in time. And here, maybe we can loop this one back through tomorrow. This is a drone that is seen flying through an Israeli military position near Metula during this weekend, and you can see the ease with which it flies through there, but you could also see the build. And if we look at the next slide, you can see what that drone looked like. And again, we've seen these builds, a number of the builds. Here we have batteries on the bottom. We've seen them various other ways, batteries in the middle. If we look at the next one, you can see the Hezbollah build here with the fiber optic spool on the bottom, the batteries in the middle, and then the anti-tank warhead on the top. The PG-7VL, which is the best single round RPG. But as we know from Gaza, single round RPGs need to be very specifically hit on a Naumer troop carrier or a Merkava tank in order to destroy the tank. There's lots of ways to hit it for mobility kills that make it unable to drive. But in terms of destroying the tanks, which we saw last week on the show when the soldiers left the hatch open, that was exploited. But we know from Gaza that the single rounds aren't they could be stopped most times by the armor on the Merkava tank. And so we've seen the tanks be less targeted. We're going to watch on this program a number of times where the tanks are bypassed to hit smaller, softer targets and to hit troops as well. And that kind of battlefield adaptation is really taking its toll on the Israelis. Let's take a look at number 7 here. So that just showed you, those last 2 pictures shows you what you're going to see crashing into these things in these next videos. So I wanted to put those in there so you could see it again through the destroyed town. This is near Bint Jbeil. Again, stalking through the town. You're going to see it identify here 3 troop carriers, and you're going to see the 2 of them with their backs to the buildings because they're backing right up into the building and letting the soldiers walk into the building from there. So he passes on that Namer, and he sees this one with the rear door exposed, and that is a weak point. Hitting the rear door is an effective spot to hit with a single round RPG, particularly with these high-end Iranian rounds that are being delivered here. So these are smart targeting. You know, sometimes earlier in the war, we saw them crashing them into the armor of the front armor of the tanks. And very quickly they have adapted. You can see that's a direct hit. That's the last drone shot. It's going through the door on the back of the tank, which is not fully sealed. Let's look at number 8 here. Coming over the top to hit this hilltop position in the western sector, a newly positioned base here that they're going to circle around and come back and chase a soldier off of his armored vehicle. And Hezbollah writes on their field reports every day at the end, they say the Islamic resistance is committed to defending its land and its people, especially as the Israeli enemy crosses boundaries with its criminality. Again, you're going to see the drone drop right out of the sky. As soon as it sees the soldiers, you're going to see the soldiers on that tank see that it's coming, and the tank crewman there jumping off. We could show the next one that just shows the direct, the dive down here onto the tank. And again, skipping the tank and going for the soldier itself. A development in tactics that we have seen this week. And it's just remarkable, the improvements on the battlefield and the awareness of the Hezbollah pilots. Let's look at the next one. It's just got a still of him jumping off of the tank. This week, I'm going to tell you, the Israelis this week admitted to 1 fatality amongst their soldiers and 11 wounded in FPV attacks. And we say it all the time on this show, but those numbers do not add up with what you're going to be watching on this show. They don't even add up to what we've seen in these first few videos. But let's take a look at number 11, because they're going to chase some more soldiers here near, again, this is in Bayada. On the coast, you can see the Mediterranean in the distance there. There's a tank in the bottom right corner. He flies right by that tank. And here he's going to hone in on the headquarters of the 146th Division, which is based in Bayada. And it is, here you're going to see the troops. They don't seem to hear the drone, which is possible when anyone who's been around a Merkava tank knows that you can't hear anything around it. It's possible the tanks are running, but the situational awareness of these troops seems to be limited, although they did talk in Haaretz today in the newspaper about how the soldiers have 2 things to do when the drones come: duck and pray. That was the Haaretz story with officers from the field. So you can see those soldiers there. The next slide I'll show you is where they're targeting. And again, even if it does look like that drone is about to clip the wall there, but that's going to detonate the anti-tank round, which is a piercing round, firing on those targets there. And also just this week, Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qassem, he said to our commanders, our field officers, and all fighters in all areas of the battlefield, your drone attacks embrace the land and choke the occupier. Your drones terrorize the evildoers and tyrants of the earth. Your missile strikes shake their lives, and they live in anxiety and psychological crisis. This has been the thing that Hezbollah has been pushing on with their psychological operations externally, but also internally to their own fighters, to remind you of a period of victory. Like Nasrallah used to say, I promised you victory before. And that was the 2000 victory. And then Nasrallah would say that over and over again. I promised you victory after each battle that Hezbollah won in 2000 and then in 2006 again. Let's take a look at number 13. Now, this is a target on an Iron Dome air defense system, which is Israel's primary defense against Hezbollah weapons, rockets, primarily rockets, artillery rockets, but also drones. They talked after the first few weeks of the war. There you see the Iron Dome launcher. You can see the launch, the missiles in the top there, and it's directly onto that launcher, destroying it. Which is going to cost at least a couple $1 million. If it's loaded, you can see it's loaded with 18 missiles of the 20 missiles, so that's another nearly $2 million. So let's call it a $4 million hit with this $200 drone that we're watching. This is now the day after, and the drone goes back to the same site and finds the soldiers replacing the launcher, their mobile launchers. You see the launcher on the left there is going to replace it, and you see 9 soldiers here underneath the Hezbollah drone, and it lands in between the group of them. So it's pretty remarkable to be targeting these Iron Dome systems, and Israel was really panicked about it. Channel 13 said the most dangerous thing is that Hezbollah has started to focus on Iron Dome systems themselves. The Israelis said that they had used Iron Dome 27 times as of May 1st to intercept drones. So they're using $100,000 Tamer interceptor missiles against these $200 drones. We can look at the next slide and you can see the launcher that was hit, which is 14. There you can see the launcher. You can see at the top there, that's 4 rows of 5 missiles in each, interceptor missiles. And you can see that 3, it looks like 3, maybe 4 of them have been fired. And that is hit directly with an anti-tank warhead. It will destroy, as we saw in the second video, the next day, it completely destroyed that launcher. And these drones, as I've mentioned a bunch of times, while they're on their offensive mission, they're also reconnaissance drones, because the entire flight is a reconnaissance flight until it becomes an attack. And so Hezbollah is shown that they had shown before the FPV era that they had intelligence on all these Israeli positions. We watched that for 2 years during the genocide in Gaza when Hezbollah was a support front, that they knew what they were hitting in each of these places. They knew what each Israeli base had on it. And now they have these, 10 operations a day of FPV drones that are collecting data the whole time that they're flying. So they're able to pick off things like these launchers, which are mobile. The Iron Dome system is a mobile launcher system. They're not fixed. They move them all over the place. They even put them on ships. And so they're not always in the same spot. They move around. Hezbollah sees them on their drones and picks them off and takes a $4 million hit out of the U.S. funded Israeli allowance, I guess we'll call it. And then the 15 just shows the 9 soldiers there. And they're on the left-hand side there. You see the new launcher system that's going to replace the one that got destroyed. Let's take a look at 16. This is an FPV strike. First person view is the FPV. You're going to see it coming right down here on this tank. It's going to target the commander's hatch. You're going to see it deliver right into the commander's hatch there. That is a weaker spot. We've seen that hatch open, of course. We saw the hatch open in Gaza and hand delivered through the hatch. But Hezbollah is clearly understanding the hatch. There you see the perfect shot of the hatch. That on the left side is the hatch that they pop their heads out of, and it is not as sealed and doesn't have as many layers of armor and reactive armor as the rest of the tank. So that's why it's one of the places that they aim for. And the Israelis have a call sign for when they hear this. I talked about it last week. They call it an air hammer, and out over their radios, they send a warning that it's an air hammer. And like I said, Haaretz said the 2 things that soldiers do when they hear air hammer is duck and pray. Let's look at number 17. Going to chase some more soldiers on this same base up here on the top of this mountain near Nakura. This is on the western coast. This is a previous IDF position, long-term position on the border. So now they're striking on the Israeli side of the border here. And you're going to see this drone circle around. And if you look at the bottom right, you're going to see soldiers running right there. There you get the Hezbollah circles. You can see them go into the hangar, and the drone chases them into the hangar, and it's going to detonate in the hangar and send the piercing charge through that underground area. And again, 1 fatality, 11 wounded in all of these operations, according to the Israelis. This is in the Western 146th Division, is a reserve division that is in charge of this area of responsibility. So this is a reserved unit getting hammered. Let's take a look at 18. This is a shot on a helicopter base, a staging base, you could say. The drone's going to come down. You see the soldier fleeing. Some talk that he was fleeing into a washroom. I think those are their makeshift bomb shelters, but for his sake, you wouldn't want that to be the washrooms. But he is a tank transporter battalion leader that was hit there. That's near Shlomi. Again, you can see how they have coverage over this whole base. You can see how there's cars there. So the soldiers drive up to the bases in their car, and then they're dispatched from this kind of staging ground into the occupation. There's a helipad as well there. Let's take a look at number 19, because this is we saw this in Gaza as well, using a servo motor to drop the munition. The munition is what you're seeing at the bottom there. That's the new fuse that Hezbollah has adapted to the end of this round. And this isn't going to be an anti-tank round. This is going to be a fragmentation warhead. The anti-tank round creates a piercing dart, and this round is going to be a fragmentation round, which blows like a grenade. And you can see why you would use that type of warhead on this. This is technical gear at an Israeli base. They drop on it and seem to hit it dead in the area. And if it is a fragmentation warhead, the shrapnel will spray out and destroy all of that gear, which we're going to see that happening on this video in a moment here. The last scene will show the next day that here it is, that the gear has been moved. So we have a bunch of these each week where they're picking off these pretty significant deep intelligence to get these kind of targets. So that was in Ras Al Bayada as well. Let's look at 20 now. This is in Bintaj Bale. You can see the roads all dug up again, and they make their own paths because they're scared to drive on the roads, fearing that they are that there's IEDs. Here you get another perfect example. Tank on the left, tank on the right, troop carrier on the left, 2 bulldozers and a tank in front, and he's going to circle around. He has all of these options to hit. He's also looking in that house to see if there's anyone moving in that house, but then he's going to turn, come back, and hit the D9 armored bulldozer, which is the target to hit in this circumstance with those targets, because you're going to destroy the D9 armored bulldozer entirely with this warhead that is delivered right into the cockpit. So they lose another D9 armored bulldozer, which is a genocide tool. It's really, there's no other purpose for a D9 bulldozer than genocide. Let's look at number 21. Here we have one of these thermal. There's an anti-tank guided missile strike, a Cornet strike. You can see the tank there burning. We're watching this on thermal camera at night. There's a second Cornet anti-tank missile strike on a tank, and you can see that tank burning there as well. And now you're going to see a complex operation. This is the Israelis you can see their spotlight trying to figure out what's going on after they've got 2 burning tanks, and now artillery is being launched at them along with a smoke screen from their tanks. Their tanks can hold a smoke screen with their exhaust, and they pump it out from there. You're going to see them here hit with a few more mortars in this period of time before the fight. There you see them. fired down on the troops. And you're going to see the third anti-tank guided missile strike there. And again, burning vehicle. This is on the western coast. Now you're going to see footage. This is from Sur, from Tyre in South Lebanon, shot by Lebanese civilians, showing the tanks that are burning in that case. So significant multi-layered operation there in Ras Al Bayada. Let's look at 22. Another really smart target. This is going to target an 𝐓𝐡𝐞, which is a command and control vehicle. It's not your everyday tank. It's built on the hull of a Merkava tank, but it has enhanced electronic warfare and jamming systems in there, and they put it right through the open back door, which would completely blow up that entire command and control capability, the network capabilities that those 𝐓𝐡𝐞s, they have only a limited number of them. And that is prime targeting. And this is what we're seeing in now week 10, total command by the pilots, and also of the targeting of what to choose to target, not only the flying, not only the attacking, but what's the subject of the targeting. When we compare this to the first week, remarkable development that has the Israelis still week after week scrambling. Let's look at 23, because this is the one that everybody wants. Everybody asks me why they don't send 2 cameras so that we can see battle damage assessment. And I think the simple answer for that is it's just too many drones. But you're going to see the Merkava tank there, and you can see its cannon is pointing up, its main gun is pointing up, and they're putting that drone into that hole, which is an effective place to hit it. If you're going to hit a tank, you can see how it's lifted up there. And now here's the second drone going to show you the first drone hit. And that's what it looks like when the tank gets hit. But I just don't think when you're fighting a battle for an existential battle for survival, I don't think you have the luxury of doubling up just so people can see the aftermath. But you can see that's a significant strike on the tank. The tank did not defeat that round. There's no question about that. So there's 2 cameras for the people who ask for it, but I don't think it's something that Hezbollah will do very often, although they did it this morning. I was editing that in the green room before coming on. They did show us from multiple camera angles. And when they do that, it's definitely a devastating military media intervention. Let's look at 24 now. Again, this is in Ras Al Bayada. You can see the coast off in the distance there. It's targeting a reserve battalion, and they're going to come in down on this Merkava tank, and again, targeting the door. So we're not seeing at all this week anything targeting the armored front, the armored top. There it is. It goes directly through the door. And when this last frame freezes, you're going to see it freeze on that, right on the door. So that is a perfect hit. The pilots are good. The Israeli military said that the pilots are spread out across all the front line. They're not in their normal unit. They're not in the Air Force of Hezbollah, their drone unit, but they're rather embedded within all of the different infantry units. So they have these all across the front lines, and there's a direct hit on the back door of that Merkava. Let's go 25, because we see Humvees here being targeted, and these are also good targets. We saw in Gaza, anytime we saw a single round RPG be fired in Gaza, they were firing them at these Humvees. Because, of course, the genius in Gaza was that they were firing Yasin 105s, and those were tandem charged. They had 2 charges in each warhead, and if those could be used in these circumstances, they would be effective. Because they have the 2 rounds. So there's the destruction of that Humvee. And we know that the Americans, last week I reported on the American air bridge of weapons, and we watched these Humvees and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 come off the trucks, or come off the ships, I should say, replacing all of these so that Israel can continue its genocide. But taking out these Humvees that are already in Lebanon at forward positions, this is massively disruptive for the ability of the Israelis to fight, if they were trying to fight. instead of just attacking civilians. Let's look at 26, another one in Ras Al Bayada, another one versus a tank. You see a whole group of them there that are shown. This one's going to hit the track of the tank. Possible mobility kill when you hit the track. You're going to see it come down here. I think he maybe misses the door by a little bit, but he's aiming for the door. And once that round detonates, it's going to send a piercing shot through that door in any case. And it's also going to destroy the track on that armored vehicle. Let's look at 27 now. This is what I thought we would start seeing more of, and I think we will see much more of in the coming weeks. This is an attack on a forward base, and rather than attacking the armored vehicles parked in front of the forward base, Hezbollah is going to put this drone through the living room window of the base, which puts the anti-tank round into... You'll see the round will detonate off the window and will send its pierce and its shrapnel into the base. So perhaps the base is empty, or perhaps Israel's lying about their casualties. I tend to think it's the latter. Let's look at 28 now. We're going to go into the riverbed, the Litani riverbed near Der Sirion here. So we're now back up in the top of the Galilee Panhandle, and you can see using this riverbed, Israel is trying to use this riverbed as cover, which you can see they're going to fly over a number of vehicles here in the valley. Again, just beautiful South Lebanon being destroyed by a genocidal entity that doesn't seem to know when to stop. Turns around, comes back, and heads down into the valley where there is a Land Rover Command Jeep. Look on the back. It's bristling with intelligence, surveillance, satellite, radar. You see it hit that. That's usually a command vehicle, and that is a significant loss because that is how they organize their network connectivity through their different vehicles. And you can see on the back there, it's just lit with antennas, cameras, satellite, radar. So significant hit there. Are we on 27 tomorrow? Yes. No. We're on 29. I'm with you. So there we saw a Jeep hidden, a Humvee hidden there. He's going to come back around on it. This one is the tent. They're going to hit the tent. And this is interesting because Israel is thinking that the solution, see the tent there? And they've got it trying to conceal it there. That is a base. And rather than the Jeep, he's going to go and hit on that base. Presumably there's troops underneath there and a direct hit on it. And Israel today said that the IDF has sent to Lebanon 158,000 square meters, which is basically 20 soccer fields or football pitches, depending on where you are in the world, of netting. And the idea is that they're going to put netting all over everything, which is something that they do in the war in Ukraine. They use fishing nets. And it's not totally clear to me. They use different weapons on the drones in Ukraine than they are here with Hezbollah. If these Hezbollah rounds get tangled up in the net, it should be enough power based on the speed that the quadcopter is flying. It should be enough power to trigger the fuse and detonate. So I don't think these screens are going to be the savior that Israel is banking on, but we will reserve judgment on that until we see more operations against those nets. That's the first time we saw that this week, passing on vehicles entirely and hitting troop positions. Let's look at number 30, because this is going to get a soldier in a house. Again, remember, 1 soldier killed, 11 wounded in this entire week in Hezbollah FPV drone operations, according to the Israelis. So it's going to fly around here, and you're going to see standing out on the balcony there. Oh, sorry, this side. Yeah, there he is. Israeli soldier, unlikely alone in that house. So he's being a soldier in a window for the rest of his group. And the pilot is going to take it around perpendicular and go right through the front window into that base. This is in Taibeh, again, on the northwestern part of the Galilee Panhandle. So into a house of soldiers. This is what we've seen now. This is the fourth one in this pack alone, and already there's been multiple that you'll see on next week's show, because we have, as you know, our cutoff deadline is Wednesday. We can't. We have to have a production window, so these are Wednesday to Wednesday. So next week you will see the operations from the past, from today and yesterday, will be the beginning of next week's show. And previously I was saying like these operations were 2 weeks old. They're not that way anymore. We're getting these the day after in a lot of cases. Sometimes we get them the same day. The most is 2 days after. So these operations that you're watching are actually operations from this past week, whereas in previous resistance reports we were talking about operations that were 2 weeks in some cases previously. So that's an advance too that we're watching. So let's look at 31. We've got another thermal operation here. If you can look at the circles on the left-hand side there, and now in the middle, you're going to see little soldiers start to run. They're tracking in this. I tracked at least a dozen, because you can see there's some more coming, running down the hill to go into that house. So now we've seen half a dozen at least. And then if you see to the right, you can see a few more are coming. Yeah, there's another bunch of them. So we're looking at, and then there's 3 more coming from the right. There's another one coming. They're all running down the hill. Now we're upwards of 15 just that we've seen with our eyes enter this building. And here comes an anti-tank guided missile strike, Cornet, the tank killer unit, firing on a Israeli military troop position. Possible thermobaric there. I think we would see a little more if it was thermobaric. It's very tough to tell with the thermal because we don't get enough shots to really tell. But the Cornet has a thermobaric warhead, which would just make a mess of that Israeli position. Let's look at 32 now. Again, on the coast, again, battering the same division on the coast. This is going to be another Humvee here, circling around back to hit the Humvee. That in the back of that Humvee is covering up technical gear as well. And directly onto the hood, that explodes. The Humvee explodes. It's completely out of service. Another destroyed one. And this week alone, I marked them all down. Tanks and APCs took 30 FPV drones and 6 anti-tank guided missiles. Humvees and other vehicles like those Land Rovers, the vehicles that were instantly destroyed, they took 19 at, $500,000 to $1 million a piece. The D9 bulldozers and excavators took 15 FPV strikes. Troops took 50. So we're now seeing more troops being targeted than we're seeing vehicles here in week 10. 1 against the Iron Dome, 6 against gear and equipment. And then we also saw upwards of 50 rocket and artillery operations, which are complementing these drone operations all the time. And we talk about the drone operations because they have videos on them, and we can break down the videos. But the rocket ops are a consistent part. They match all of these operations. Afterwards, after they're hit by the drones, they'll fire artillery on the same spot when troops are gathered around there. So let's take a look at 33, because these are going on all week. This is the Hezbollah-built Syed 107 drone. You're going to watch it with the air piston launch, which reduces its heat signature for the Israelis that are trying to track it. And these drones are coming across the border constantly every day across the border, but also on Israeli troop positions in Lebanon. There's a good shot of it flying, and we've seen those flying across the border. The Hezbollah shows them flying up to the border, and then Israelis in the north often show us them flying, because these defeat air defense systems. These often have to be shot down with helicopters. So these are very effective weapons that are constantly being used, Hezbollah built. And then this last one here is this artilleryman firing from the bush reminded me of when I visited South Lebanon after the 2006 war, and somebody said to me that all the rocks are Hezbollah, and it was a reference to even the rocks are Hezbollah, which is a reference to when Hezbollah used to hide audio systems, recording systems for troops in the rocks, or the rocks were IEDs. In this case, even the trees are Hezbollah. This artilleryman firing from the bush, and all you would see from the outside is a mortar flying out of the trees. So even the trees are Hezbollah. So this has been the Resistance Report for day 951 of Israel's genocide in Gaza and day 73 of Hezbollah's defense of South Lebanon.
Thank you so much, Jon. And speaking of when you visited in 2006, I was wondering if, I mean, during that time, which was the second major defeat of Israel in, 6 years, how, how they didn't have the FPV drones, they didn't have the Shahed drones, they didn't have all of this weaponry. What can you say about the kind of escalation of guerrilla warfare, and your assessment of how the war is going for Israel at this moment?
Well, they had invested a lot in the Kovnet anti-tank guided missile systems. They have an Iranian version of that, and they had them. That was their main weapon of the resistance, and that's how they won the 2006 war, with their tank killer units using Kovnets and catching tank columns like the videos that you just saw, going through the valleys, going through the wadi, is very dangerous. And those tank killer teams would hit the front and the back of the convoy and trap the tanks in the middle, and then pick each tank off after that. And so that was a very effective tool, and it won the war in 2006. Of course, the fighters won as well. The fighters held their positions, and essentially the 2006 war was a rescue operation for Israeli troops. The Israeli objectives in the war were not met because they spent most of the time in that month recovering soldiers that had been defeated by Hezbollah infantry forces and special forces down in the south. And that's what we were talking about in Gaza, was like after 2006, when you watched what Hezbollah did to the Israelis, you would think that this would mean that in Gaza, they would say, like, we need to get as many Kovnet anti-tank guided missile systems as possible. But that's very difficult. It was difficult through the blockade. They're expensive. They're particular. And in that period of time where you might be building up your Kovnet stocks, Qassam did the opposite. They went with the tandem charged Yasin 105, the tandem charged RPG round, and they made those in massive numbers, a simple weapon that all their fighters could use, that because they could get so close to the tanks, the accuracy of them was amazing. And so it's just remarkable how Gaza, sort of bypassed what you'd think was the tool for them. And they adapted to the fact that they're under blockade and built their own weapon that had already had a proven track record. So it's really smart. And then this war, the Hezbollah tank killer units with the Kovnets are still there. We watched them for 2 years picking off tanks and surveillance gear. And then this round of war comes, and they're using a completely different weapon. to great effect. So
Yeah.
this is how you keep an army, an invading army, an occupation army on the back foot constantly and questioning itself. And that's where the PSYOPs, the psychological operations videos come in, because they're pressing on the fact that the Israelis are running scared in this situation. They don't know
Literally.
they don't
Yeah.
know at any point when they're going to be hit by these drones. There's nowhere safe for them. The Hornets have a range limit of 5, even their best ones 10 kilometers. But these attack drones, especially the FPV ones that counterintuitively have longer range, they're much better at accessing all spots on the battlefield that the Israelis are, and that's why we see some of them hitting trucks and whether unloading, because they're seeing everything.
Yeah.
And that footage is just extraordinary, John. The difference is that they also can loiter and, as you said, do surveillance, and then the drone pilot, who is of course doing it by remote control, but is seeing what we see through the video, that's the first person view, can take their pick and loiter around, maneuver, go into houses. It's just incredible footage. It is. I hate to use this analogy because it sort of cheapens the reality of war and conflict, but it is like a video game when you're watching it. And I mean, I've played video games like that, not in a while, but that's how immediate it is. And I remember one thing you said when you were talking about, I think it was in 2000 when the Israelis left South Lebanon, and you said they just left everything and ran down the hills and fled. And that was on May 25th of 2000. The Israelis left South Lebanon. And I was in South Lebanon a few weeks later. I think it was in mid-June or end of June 2000. And we were in South Lebanon. And we went to some of the Israeli points, which are at the top of the mountains. And the people of South Lebanon had left everything just as it was. They wanted to show it and documented it. There were literally cans of opened food and half-eaten meals in the Israeli, little fortresses or command posts at the top of the hills. I will never forget that.
Yeah, their computers were still on. They were typing, and they turned and they said, "We're going home." And they literally ran down the hill. They didn't wait for their escorts. They ran away. It's
with their tanks, the remnants of their destroyed tanks.
Well, that's in 2006.
That was 2006.
In 2006, you could see in Bintish Bale, you could stand on the edge of Bintish Bale and you could see the tank tracks coming up, and you could see where the line was. And of course, that's where they wanted to show me. They were like, "Come here and look at this." But it's like you could see the tank treads. And then when their tanks were destroyed, they don't leave them because they don't want them to be in the Hezbollah museum. So they would drag the tanks down the hill with helicopters. They would hook them up with helicopters and drag the tanks upside down in whatever form they were
Walk
in,
of shame,
and just carve this whole rut into the ground. Those were the two real signs of defeat, that you come into the town of Bintish Bale and you could see where the tank made it to and no further. And it was like that in 2000 with the meals on the table, the computers on, their uniforms hanging up because they were in their, not in their uniforms in that moment. They just ran without their uniforms. And psychologically, that psychological impact on the Israelis is what Hezbollah is trying to tap back into this time, that this isn't going to be any different than the victories that Nasrallah promised before. And Naim Qassem has said it, that the people of Lebanon will return home and they will rebuild. They're not talking about a security zone.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John, as always. Lots more. You're already compiling videos for next week's show. So thanks and good luck, and please get some rest, et cetera, et cetera. Let's take a look at the website. There are some brand new features that we've published. I haven't even read yet, as well as some new reports by our colleagues. That's our colleague Dave Cronin's new report
Yeah,
on the
you know,
EU.
this one, because people may have noticed in the last couple of days, with a lot of fanfare, the EU announced sanctions against a few settlers for their violence, as if it's just a few bad apples and not the Israeli state that is pushing and fueling and supporting the settler violence. The settlers are the vanguard for the Israeli state. They're not, bad apples. So these performative sanctions by the EU that are just designed to release public pressure and outrage at how much the EU is supporting Israel financially, militarily, diplomatically. And so David Cronin, who is just second to none when it comes to exposing European Union wrongdoing and complicity in genocide and apartheid, is showing that the money from Brussels, the euros, are still flowing to the genocidal apartheid regime despite these cosmetic sanctions on a few individuals.
Yeah. Excellent. Please go check that out. That's titled Sanctioning Violent Settlers. EU gives $3 million to firm hiring Israel's spies by Dave Cronin.
Yeah.
We also have,
Oh, I was going to, sorry.
No,
I was going to suggest to Asa, do you want to say something about the piece by, is it 𝐄𝐥𝐞? Is that how it's pronounced?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. This is a piece by one of the Palestine Action defendants. I believe he was one of the hunger strikers, actually, as well, if memory serves. And he's talking here about how, as the title says, direct action is a weapon of the people, and he's talking about the general state of Palestine Action, the ban on Palestine Action, and how it has had an impact in the UK, and about really how effective carrying out direct action has been in shutting down 4 sites of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 in the UK, including drone parts factories, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 being Israel's largest private arms manufacturer, which has had around a dozen facilities, factories, or other offices in the UK. It's well worth reading.
Excellent.
And he actually wrote this from prison, right? He's
right.
in pre-trial detention. So,
the
walls of the prison cannot silence him, and very proud to provide a platform.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, he's actually writing this from inside the prison cell himself. Like many of the Palestine Action defendants, facing criminal damage charges and other related charges, he's been on remand for a while. So it's the state is using all of its tools against these campaigners, and in many cases treating them as terrorists. And of course, the pretext for the ban on Palestine Action, the idea behind the ban, is that it's a terrorist group, despite the fact that it's a direct action protest group which doesn't harm people.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's incredible. And it's by 𝐄𝐥𝐞. It's called Direct Action is a Weapon of the People. Give that a read. We have so much on the Electronic Intifada. We, of course, have our colleague and our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy's monthly Palestine in Pictures. Just as always, just such a brilliant and moving
this month, as every month, by the photographers in Gaza. And then, of course, Maureen has this really rich overview of events over the last month. So it's really a way to it's almost like a briefing where it keeps you up to date, gives you the big picture. And so you know what's happening in the West Bank, you know what's happening in Gaza, and Maureen kind of ties it all together in a way that is, I find it's one of the ways I stay informed is by reading the text that goes with Month in Pictures every month. So that's I'm telling you from experience, this is very good stuff.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful, moving photo essay and report. So thanks, Maureen. Speaking of people to thank, Ali, people who have signed up for our email list, you can go to, of course, get updates at the top right of electronicintifada.net. You can also use the Donate Now link, the button on the top right. It's amazing. I usually get my right and left mixed up, but the top right is our Donate Now link, and people have been using that to support this platform and this live stream and our publication and all of our contributors in Gaza and around the world. Ali, who do we have to thank this week?
Yes, they have been using it, and there are also links in the description if you're watching on YouTube, so that if you want to make a donation, and if you can, because we only want those who have the resources to support this, so it's free and available for everyone. How frustrating is it when you go to a news site and you click on something you want to read and there's a paywall?
Always.
How frustrating is it when you click on an interesting interview on YouTube or any other platform and you get to watch the first 20 or 30 minutes and they say, you know, if you want to see the rest, become a subscriber? That will never happen with the Electronic Intifada. Everything we do is free for everyone in the world. But the only way that's possible is because there are incredible, generous, dedicated people who believe in the work we do and who want this information to be shared with everyone. That's our mission. We are a non-profit independent publication powered and supported by you, so many people around the world, and among them are Christine, Yusma, Henry, Michael, Anne, Leon, Fred, Laura, Salim, Shaf, David, and Carmen. Thank you all. Some of you made one-time donations, and some of you are give a recurring monthly donation, which is another way some people like to give. You can set that all up at the links, and we so appreciate it. And as you see, even while we're on air, Jon is already preparing next week's show. I'm behind the scenes here editing my article, debunking the latest rape hoax. We're multitasking here. We hope to get that published ASAP, so check out the website. Nora, you will already start working on next week's
Already
briefing.
have.
You've already started on it. Asa is, Asa is the one with the investigative pieces, and he's got several, irons in the fire. And then, of course, all the other work that's going on by our colleagues, writing, editing, working with our contributors in Gaza and around the world. It all is a tremendous effort. We love doing it because we feel we have a mission, and we feel like we're doing it as part of a big team with you as part of it. So thank you so much for all your support.
And of course, Tamara Nassar behind the scenes, doing all of the directing and editing and production. Thank you so much.
And all, and then, people see Tamara's articles. They hear that she's behind the scenes during the live stream, putting up the clips and the videos and everything that we want to do. But what they don't necessarily see is what goes on before and what goes on after, when you see all of the video clips, the segments, the titles, the beautiful graphics, the social media that Tamara is working on, and Ellie Gerzon, who I know will acknowledge too. All of that is a lot of time and effort and love goes into it. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's part of this team and everyone who's watching.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. And thanks to Ellie, of course. Thanks to Pierre Loisel for the radio production of this live stream, and for all of our colleagues, and on behalf of all of our contributors, and that includes people in Gaza, people around the world, people writing from prison. And on behalf of myself, Jon, Ali, Tamara, and Asa, thank you all, and we will see you next week.